has not turned in their testimony card yet, please turn it in now. It is now 6:05, and I would like to welcome everybody to the Josephine County Planning Commission hearing, and wish you all a happy Halloween. And we will start our proceedings tonight. Commissioner Gardner, would you like to introduce this?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Church.
Here.
Commissioner Richardson. Here. Commissioner Goodwin. Here. Commissioner Chambers.
Here.
Commissioner Gardner.
Here.
Commissioner Wright. Commissioner DeSimone.
All right, we do have a quorum, so we will proceed this evening. I would like to once again say, if anybody would like to speak tonight and has not turned in a testimony card, the testimony cards are available from planning staff, and you will turn in a card to speak. We'll be calling on people from the cards. Nobody will be approaching the podium without being called on. This meeting of the Josephine County Planning Commission will be conducted according to the Josephine County Land Use Hearing Rules as they apply to legislative action. A summary of the rules follows. The planning staff will identify and explain the laws and procedures governing this action. If you believe that any of the laws or procedures cited are not identified, followed, or correctly applied, you must raise the issue to the chair for a ruling, clearly raising a legal or procedural issue in order to be understood by the commission and participants may prevent a later appeal of the hearing. All participants are free to express their views about whether the proposed legislation is good policy or appropriate use of county resources. Any person who participates in this hearing may receive mailed notice of the Planning Commission's final decision by requesting the notice in writing. If the decision is appealed to the Board of Commissioners, or if the Board of Commissioners initiates its own review, anyone who participated in this hearing and provides a mailing address will receive notice of the board's meeting. Participants are obliged to know and follow the rules and procedures. The planning staff present has a copy of the rules. The first item on the agenda is as follows. Public Land Use Legislative Hearing, text amendment to the Josephine County Rural Land Development Code. If approved, the decision will allow changes to the Rural Land Development Code to address growing marijuana in the residential zone. Other text amendments proposed to help address land use conflicts that have arisen as a result of the marijuana industry in Josephine County, including fencing, plant location, oversight, building size and overcrowding, odor, light, waste management, noise, camping, runoff, and citation authority. Does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the commission to hear this matter? All right. The Josephine County Rural Land Development Code sets the following time limits for testimony. Participants are limited to 5 minutes unless the chair or commission grants additional time at the request of the speaker. The laws and procedures applicable to this legislative item shall be presented by the planning staff as part of the staff report, and our Community Development Director, Julie Schmeitzer, will please give the staff report.
Commissioners, my name is Julie Schmelzer. I'm the Director of Community Development for Josephine County. You have all received a thorough copy of the staff report, and I have to ask if you've all looked through that, read through that. Okay. I will not go into the detail of that staff report. I'd rather, if it's okay with you, focus on the details of the proposed text amendments specifically. For the benefit of the public, I will just review what's in that staff report quickly though, okay? So with the staff report, basically it's a memo to the Plan Commission identifying what the proposal is about, which is what Chair Goodwin just read. And then it talks about your authority to review it. It talks about the board's authority to review your recommendation. It talks about the review criteria. And it talks about the goals that are in this county plan and in the state legislation that we're supposed to meet, and then how we satisfy those goals. So that's in the staff report, along with the proposed text amendments and the staff summary. So I will go into the details real quick, because this is going to take quite a while. And James. Here. Yeah, I don't want to do this on every slide though. We had it set up that it was just supposed to go. So I first want to start out with why we chose October 31st. We've had a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but we've had some complaints about why did we choose Halloween. And I have to let you know we did not choose Halloween. What we chose to do was, whatever decisions are made, we wanted to make sure that we had the new rules in the hands of all the growers by April 1st. So we wanted to make sure that if there's changes, we did not want to wait until people had plants in the ground or new fences up, and then the county comes out and starts asking people to move plants or move fences. So we thought, well, let's try and make sure that whatever is proposed is adopted, and we can have a letter to that effect in the growers' hands to make sure that we were all working together and not causing problems. Due to our season and what staff has observed this past year, we knew that April 1st should really be our target date. Now, when and if the county board or the county board of commissioners decides to adopt these text amendments, there's a 90-day hold period, basically. So when you go backwards from that, that means January 1st. If you decide tonight to move forward with recommendations to the board of commissioners, they also have to have legal notice requirements, meaning their meeting would be held in December. With that meeting held in December, that would give them 2 to 3 weeks to actually approve or do their minutes, their findings, and then get them approved to meet that January 1st deadline, so that we can then have the 90 days so we can send the courtesy letter out by April 1st. So it's not like we chose Halloween on purpose, it's just that this was the last possible day we could do it to actually proceed with a courtesy letter, which we thought was very important for our farmers. Some people have complained about why the county is involved in marijuana regulation. So, and why we are allowing marijuana in the residential areas. So I just wanted to go through some of the laws that apply to this. SB 1598 allows the county to set reasonable regulations. They're often referred to as time, place, and manner regulations. So what we are doing tonight falls within the guidelines of those time, place, and manner regulations. Why I'm specifically here is because it was a directive from the Board of Commissioners to the Planning Director to come up with some draft management regulations to try and address marijuana, especially in the rural residential zones. When I looked at the industry and some of the problems we're having, basically the complaints that we're having and some of the issues that were raised, I had to keep in the back of my mind the purpose of the Rural Land Development Code with these regulations that I was proposing. And the purpose of the Rural Land Development Code, as specified in Section 10, is to implement the Josephine County Comprehensive Plan and to guide and manage the future growth of the county in accordance with that plan, protect public health, safety, and welfare, and then to assist the public in identifying the regulations. That first bullet there is really, I take to heart, and I want to make sure that any rules I propose to you for consideration uphold the comprehensive plan, those goals that were in that staff report. Basically, being that we want to make sure we are having orderly growth and development, and that we're also preserving such things as agriculture and looking at the environment as well. A little background to get us where we are here today. After the Board of Commissioners gave me that charge, they held 4 town hall meetings throughout the county. There was one in Williams, one in Wolf Creek, one in Cape Junction, and one here in Grants Pass. They were all well attended. The Wolf Creek one was a little late, but the other ones were all well attended. From there, we've received a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, and a lot of complaints. Right now we have, based on the complaints alone related to the marijuana industry, we have 100 open violation files, over 100 open violation files. And when I say related to the marijuana industry, I want you to understand, we get calls where somebody says, they're growing marijuana next door, you have to check it out. And we explain to them, we don't regulate marijuana under our current code. What we can regulate is the fence that's associated with the marijuana, or the camper that might be on site with the marijuana. So when I say formal complaints that we have open, they're really, they came about because of a marijuana complaint, but they really are because there's a fence or a camper violation on the majority of those. From those town hall meetings, and from the complaints and the phone calls and the emails, some things just kept resonating over and over. We kept hearing complaints about odor and then associated nausea with that. Fences were huge. We heard a lot of complaints about fences, which I think is pretty understandable, because I think we've all heard that publicly and in the paper. We've had a lot of complaints about safety. We have people calling us to tell us that they can no longer walk down their roads because they're being confronted with guns and dogs. We have people tell us that they take turns sleeping. They take shifts because they're concerned about people having retribution on their property or stealing stuff from them. There's just been a lot of complaints out there about safety, and there's really nothing we can do about guns and dogs through the Rural Land Development Code. What we can try to do is propose some amicable regulations that hopefully minimize some of that tension and thereby help reduce some of those safety concerns. We get a lot of complaints about they have no license, and we always ask, how do you know that? A lot of times it's just an assumption. We do know that as far as recreational marijuana goes, the OLCC has only issued 64 licenses to date for recreational marijuana in Josephine County. We get a lot of complaints about water usage, and the county itself does not regulate water. That's left up to the water master, which is through a state office. But we do forward those on when we do receive them or give them the number to contact the state themselves. We have a lot of comments about raw sewage, and those are typically associated with the campers. You have a lot of caretaker campers that are out there, and there's often concerns, complaints about that. And again, that's not something the county has any authority to regulate or be involved in. So those are, we tell them to call DEQ, or we refer them over to DEQ. Another one that we get quite a bit is the NIMBY, which is not in my backyard, where people just don't want marijuana for a neighbor. So we looked at each of those, and we didn't take any of it lightly. We did our research. When there was concerns about odor and pollen blowing around, things of that nature, I wanted to see what is the reality that this could travel by wind. And the best way to do that was by looking at the wind maps. So I looked at the wind maps for 30 meters high, 50 meters high, 80, 110, 140. And I couldn't find any wind maps that showed anything closer to the ground, but it didn't matter. Whichever wind map you looked at, we just don't have great wind potential here in Josephine County. So yes, we recognize there's odor, but is it flowing because of wind? Not likely. Is it pollen being blown around making people sick because of wind? Not likely. There was the comment about nausea from pollen. I had to do a little one-on-one class myself, but really, if you're growing marijuana correctly, there shouldn't be any pollen involved. Fences was a big one, and one that we really had a lot of issues with ourselves. You know, the state, OLCC, and I believe OMMP as well, they both say that you need security and they require the fence, the 8-foot-high fence. The problem is they don't explain to people that you also need a permit from your county for that, and that the state codes require permits for anything over 7 feet high. So although with the marijuana industry the fences are required to be 8 feet high, state law and local law says at 7 feet high you start regulating them. So we have a lot of fences out there that do not have permits and do not meet code, state building code. To meet state building code, they have to be engineered. And I can tell you, the 3 up there are not engineered fences. We have seen cars piled on top of each other. We have seen appliances piled on top of each other. We have seen root balls piled on top of each other, trees, the tarps, and we've seen some really nice wooden ones as well. But they were definitely a big concern and something we really had to take a close look at. Safety, like I said, there's really not much we can do about safety through the rural land development code. So that one was one that we just kind of had to take a pass on. Same thing, as I just said, with the license, the water, and the waste, there was really nothing we could do. Those do not fall within the guidelines of the rural land development code. And we can only enforce or address those matters which we have the legal authority to address. So I want to talk to you a little bit about when we started looking at which zones should marijuana be allowed in and which ones shouldn't they be allowed in. There's a lot of, the purpose of the rural land development code when you look at residential areas is residential. However, our county has agreed to allow agriculture in those zones. And you'll see as a slide coming up that the state has said if you allow agriculture, you therefore will allow marijuana. So I wanted to take a look and say, well, where is it do we have a potential for the most issues? So the day I was assigned the task, I actually had our GIS guy go through and look at all the LUX forms, the land use compatibility statements that we had received. And as of June 8th this year, we had received 177 land use compatibility statements. And of those, you can see that very few of them were in the RR1 or RR2.5, but the majority of all those land use compatibility statements were in the RR5 zone. That told me that although the code says residential is intended for residential, and although a lot of people did not want to see marijuana in the residential areas, we knew that the RR5 was the most common place where people were applying for the land use compatibility statements. We also know that of the land use compatibility statements issued so far, there are quite a few of them in RR5 already. So they would have had their, that means they have their license. So we know that RR5 is an area that is trending for marijuana and one that we probably should not restrict too heavily as far as recreational marijuana in those districts. So back to the purpose of the zones, the rural residential zone, and I'm just going to read it right here from the Rural Land Development Code. The purpose of the zone is to preserve the rural character of Josephine County while providing areas for rural residential living. That's the primary purpose of that zone right there. This zone provides a classification for lands already committed to residential development or for lands which have been accepted from the statewide planning goals on agriculture and forest lands. Densities established by the zone for developing areas to be intended to ensure that development does not exceed the carrying capacity of the land to support sewage disposal systems, consumptive groundwater withdrawal, and environmental quality. In other words, we're saying if you're a residential, whether it's R1, 2.5, or 5, the intent when this code was created was for residential living, and we didn't want something out there that would be putting a strain on the land, such as not being able to meet the groundwater demand. So when I looked at the issues that were raised with us, it became very clear I could not just restrict the amendments to rural residential. It wasn't, I don't think it was fair to the people that had concerns. It wasn't fair to the environment that we only look at rural residential issues, because what we were finding is the majority of the issues applied countywide to all zones, not just the rural residential zones. So the text amendments that I'm about to propose to you, you'll find the following apply in all zones, would apply if this was approved. So in all zones, the fencing rules, the lighting rules, the plant setbacks, the camping, the soil runoff, the enforcement, and the definitions would be applicable in all the zones that we currently have in Josephine County. Now, I will also be providing some special regulations or proposing some just for the residential zones. Those will be applicable to plant setbacks, having a dwelling on the home property first, impervious surface limits, odor, waste, and noise. So let's start with fences. So the OLCC code says they have to have a fence 8 foot high for security reasons. The state building code says fences over 7 feet need a permit and must be engineered. Current county code, which a lot of people don't realize, says that if that site obscuring fence is over 7 feet in height, it does take a permit from planning and building safety, and it must meet setbacks. That's nothing new with these text amendments. That's what's currently on the code. I went back 20 years. That's what's been in the code for 20 years. So there's nothing different on that. The proposed alteration would say it has to be solid muted color. Waivers are available. No temporary materials, in other words, no plastic or tarps, because they cannot meet state engineering standards, which is a requirement of the state code that the county is to enforce. We also talk about if there's going to be a vegetative wall or buffer. We address the canopy. It has to be contained on your property. It has to be maintained. We also talk about temporary shade cloths for grandfathered medical marijuana growers. We do know that some of the medical marijuana growers use these shade cloths. We're saying that they should be allowed, but they need a waiver. When looking at the fence rules, it became very clear we needed a definition for junk and a better definition for junkyard to address the stockpiling of appliances and cars as fences. So when you're looking at the fences, you see that there's those 4 proposals plus some definition adjustments regarding junk and junkyards. Lighting. Lighting is something that we heard about at the meetings as well. And my takeaway from, and no one has objected or disagreed with me yet, was that we in Josephine County want to preserve our night sky. But it shouldn't just be related to marijuana. So these light rules would apply in all zones. It's basically saying the current code says that we do regulate lighting, but it's only on regard to your parking lot. You may not realize that you have parking lighting standards for your personal parking lot right now, but you do. We also have them on businesses. And those lights are to be shielded or so arranged as to reflect the light away from any abutting or adjacent residential zone. So we're making sure you don't shine the light on the neighbor, but nothing about the sky. The proposed code, if adopted, we talk about 2 things. One is indoor lighting associated with an accessory building cannot be visible from dwellings on adjacent properties between 10 and 6. So if you have an accessory building, you need to keep those lights on. You need to put a tarp or something over it at night. I forget the name, but there's a name that growers actually use for that cloth. And it talks about outdoor lighting be shielded with hood and lens that cast light downward. Plant setbacks. In all zones, there is proposed a plant setback from the road. Current code, road setbacks are for structures, including fences. It does allow for some lesser setbacks if the neighboring homes are closer to the road than normally allowed. What we do is we average those homes to try and get everything in a line. The proposed code purpose would be to get the plants further from the road to lessen safety concerns, to address the visual complaints that we have, minimize fence violations of height and vision clearance. We have a lot of fences that are 7, 8 feet high right up to the right-of-way. You just can't do it. I mean, they violate a vision clearance triangle. They violate code as well. And to support the comprehensive plan goal of orderly development. And because at town hall comments, which we heard, and I actually saw the man who made the comment. I remember his face. He's here tonight. He said, "I want to be able to look out my backyard at my plants," implying, I think, that a lot of people have these in their backyard, grow them in their backyard. We know they do. We do see some up front. Most growers shouldn't have a problem with this because most of the plants would meet the that currently that are out there would meet the setback. But what it says is no plant would be within 100 feet of a road right of way unless you can use that averaging of the adjacent homes. So unless you can get it in line with the development that's in that area. It would not apply to grandfathered medical marijuana plants because those are, if you're grandfathered, you can show us proof of legality that you were there before, that you were complying with the laws at the time you established that. In the non-residential zones, the setback would be the same as it was for an agricultural building, which is typically 30 or 35 feet from the right of way. Again, most people do not have their plants that close to the right of way. Looking at the setback or the side for plants in all zones, current code requires side and rear setbacks for structures, including fences, but does not address plant setbacks. We do require ag buildings to be set back 35 feet from the side lot line. Court cases support managing plants over lot lines. We know that if you're in the planning world, you know there's every once in a while you see these cases where somebody's tree goes over a fence or over a property line, somebody cuts it down, they end up in court. There's a lot of, it's a pretty common planning problem and something that we feel confident with the marijuana setbacks because of those court cases. But it would apply in all farm and forest zones and RR5 zones over 2.5 acres. It would exempt medical and personal use. The purpose of the plant setback would be for safety and theft, but more importantly to minimize neighbor disputes and complaints. Make sure the plant is within the fence that's on the property, if there is a fence. So the proposal is that the canopy of the mature marijuana plant be 35 feet from the property line. And again, this is on the farm and forest and the larger RR5 lots. New medical or personal use would have to be 10 feet or 25 feet from the rear. That would be for new plants, not the ones that are grandfathered in. When I say grandfathered in, if you've read the details, we're talking about the location of those grandfathered plants, not the plant itself, just where it's been established on the property. Camping. Camping is one that took an interesting turn. So the current code says you can camp up to 4 months in a 12-month period, regardless of the zone. We have a lot of problems with campers out on the grow sites. They turn into compounds. That's where we're hearing a lot of complaints about the gun shooting, the dogs. We're getting a lot of complaints about the sewage on some of those. So when I originally looked at this, I said, well, they obviously need a camper out there during this growing season. They need something to monitor their property. So let's work with them and try and get them a camper out there for 9 months with a waiver and some pretty strict guidelines to make sure that that it wasn't causing problems out there. You know, let's make sure they're containing the waste. Let's make sure they're not building out buildings out there. Let's make sure that they don't have excessive dogs out there. All of these things we proposed. With the rules that we're reviewing tonight, I have to tell you they were sent to OLCC, they were sent to OHA, they were sent to DLCD, they were sent to a land use attorney, they were sent to the Department of Ag, they were sent to the County Council, they were sent to another one to make sure everything was in line. And everything was. So we feel really good about it, except for one thing. DLCD came back and said, no, you're not going to give waivers for campers out there being there 9 months. As a matter of fact, your current code is in error. They cannot even be there 4 months. So although staff tried to get the camper extensions out there, the reality is the state came down and said no, they're allowed 30 days, period. So the staff proposal was revised to say 30 days only. To make these rules applicable, of course, we would also need some definitions for camping, camping party, and camping stay. I do want to share with you the revised staff, the amendments to reflect this DLCD requirement.
You guys want to pass around if somebody wants that?
First of all, I want to just wait till everybody gets a little copy here.
No, just that I had 55 copies. Yeah, if you email me, I can send you the rest.
For those of you that were able to find the staff reports and the amendments on our webpage, we apologize, we know it's not a good website. We'll put the amended one out there tomorrow. So on page 1, I just want to alert you to the change there where when you look at the definition of campgrounds, the state came back and said, no, Julie, you're not going to say 2 or more. One camper is considered a campground. I think that's really harsh. What it means is you have to follow the standards for a campground. That's a state law. They corrected us. So that's why you're seeing that change on page 1. Fast forward to page 5. And you'll see where all the stuff that staff proposed, we cut out. And we added the language that just says, H camping, provided the camping stay does not exceed 30 days during a consecutive 6-month period. And again, that was the state that came through and said that. So we had to change that to make it consistent with that. So we still have this problem of what are we going to do with campers out there. But just so you know, the proposal we had to try and allow them out there longer and to try and get some management of them, the state said no. David?
Can I ask a question? What is the state law that regulates camping? I didn't know there was such a state law. Is it what is it?
Glad you asked.
Yeah, page 2.
I do not have many of this one.
Put it up on your website.
So I want to have you turn to page 2 right away of this packet. Commissioners, you did receive this letter from Oregon. It was mailed to you with your meeting packet, so it should be familiar to you. But it's basically the state saying, you know, you can't do what you're proposing there. But if you go to the last page, you'll see just, again, you know, there seems to be a lot of mistrust of government, so we just always want to photocopy exactly what's coming out of the statutes and the administrative rules. But these are the rules that they were talking about. So those are the rules, Commissioner Church, that you were referring to. I do want you to hang on to this because we are going to come back to the first letter in this packet in a little bit.
Yes.
Yes.
I had a question. A yurt. Is a yurt considered a tent, or is it considered a temporary dwelling of some sort?
There's specific rules on these yurts. I was really surprised how detailed we get on it. No, they're not considered dwellings.
Okay. That's something I really want to talk to you later.
So the other thing that became a little bit of an issue in all zones, and I really think it's only a problem for the really large grows that we have. So what we know are that some of the larger farmers are having soil trucked in, and then sometimes after the growing season, they switch the soil out. So you haul out the bad and you haul it in again. And it's a new use that we really haven't ran into with our agricultural practices here. Usually you're disking the soil or something, not hauling dirt in and out at that type of scale. If you did a fine reading of the code, yeah, it would take a permit when you're swapping soil because it's considered development, land disturbance. But we take a common sense approach with the current code, and the only time we would really have somebody get a permit is if they were on slopes. If we knew that there was the potential for a lot of runoff or something, then we would try and work with them and work with the state agencies to try and address it. We do regulate fill in the floodplain and riparian areas. Those rules are pretty strict on that. What this proposal would do is say, it's basically clarifying when you would require permits. It's going to set out some standards. And basically it's saying that if more than 10 cubic yards dirt runoff has to be contained at the site, if they're hauling in more than 10 cubic yards, the runoff has to be contained at the site. Require best management practices, and the dirt pile would have to be graded and reseeded within 30 days. If it's on a slope of more than 15%, it would require a stormwater management plan. So basically saying when you have dirt piles, we don't want you to just leave them sit there. If you can put it down on the ground and reseed it, and you're on a relatively flat slope, nobody cares. That is basically what it's saying. It's encouraging you to prevent your dirt from running in the water is what it's doing. That does not require a permit either. Enforcement. Yes, I am familiar with past resolutions and voter actions regarding enforcement. There is not enforcement in the current code. The state statutes do talk about enforcement. The county, as you know, just recently went through a codification of their county codes that have been brought into compliance with the state statutes. The version we got back from the attorneys does have reference to enforcement and how to address violations. The proposal you have in front of you is a softer version than what you see in that codified version. Basically, it says that we like the idea of having to work with people to resolve the violations, not just immediately on, if they don't respond, send them to legal action or start citing them. We don't want to do that. We prefer to work with them. So the version you have in front of you is a softer version than what's in that codified version or what's actually in the statutes. Definitions, you saw the list of all the definitions. Basically, it's cleaning up existing definitions or adding new definitions to remove ambiguity, so there's less room for interpretation and it's more clear to everyone what those definitions really are. Now we'll get into the rural residential specific. So these are the ones that we specific. Agriculture, purpose section of the code. However, lots in RR5 can be quite large and more supportive of commercial agriculture. In other words, we know that the commercial recreational is occurring on those lots. We know they're larger and they have more of a capacity to support that as well. So it is proposed that in R1, R2.5, and on R5 zones, on those less and that's it. If you've received your Lux, if you've applied for that Lux prior to October 1, you'd be grandfathered because you have that vested interest in that development. For the others, which would be recreational, on a lot larger than 2.5 acres in the RR5 zone, the canopy, when mature, has to be 10 feet from the side property line and 25 feet from perimeter. And again, that's just on the recreational that's just on the RR5 over 2.5 acres. And it is recreational, sorry. One thing a lot of people will not like, but it is our attempt to address or resolve some of the problems out there, is we're saying you should have a dwelling on the property before you have your recreational grow. Current code has the purpose of the residential zone is residential. We went through that before. As a matter of fact, we don't allow any other buildings on that lot until there's a home on that lot, if you're in rural residential zones. The proposed purpose is to support the comprehensive plan goal of orderly growth and development, and making sure we do not have commercial in these residential areas. They need to remain residential. Town hall comments were, again, I want to look out my backyard at my plants and find that there's a home on that property. The exemption to this rule would be the grandfathered medical marijuana. And the proposal simply is you need a dwelling on the home, on the lot, before you have your marijuana grow. There are waivers available for RR5 lots greater than 2.5 acres if one of the other lots the landowner has a dwelling on it. The idea is he can skip back and forth between his recreational parcels and watch over them, but this upholds the purpose of the residential zone being primarily residential. Rural residential specific again, looking at the accessory structures. Current code, the buildings are limited in size depending on the lot size. The proposed purpose of regulating the accessory structures would be to reduce overdevelopment in residential areas, hold the comprehensive plan goal of orderly development, reduce potential for adverse runoff onto adjacent properties. We would exempt those structures built prior to October 1st, 2016, legally built. And they can be rebuilt if they're in violation of this rule. But basically what the proposal is to develop an impervious surface standard. And basically it says that in the RR1, R2.5, R5, less than 2.5 acres, impervious surface cannot exceed half the lot. Basically that means those surfaces that which do not absorb rain cannot exceed half the lot. I went through and I found a lot of little lots out there, and I ran the calculation and I didn't find any that exceeded that. So what this does is says, you know, our lots basically do comply with this right now. What it's saying is if you're in these zones and you want to start putting up greenhouses and other buildings, you can do that as long as you still comply with those size limitations. But we want to make sure you're not overdeveloping in these residential areas. Order. The state has a code, it's called the Right to Farm Laws. You know, they protect agriculture. Current code does not protect or address odor at all. The proposed purpose of addressing odor is to minimize complaints, improve neighbor relations by regulating the odor, when possible, in non-agricultural zones. Reality is you can't regulate outdoor plant odor. Some people have said we can, but nobody's come up with a solution yet, so I don't have one in here for you. And typically, you will not have a large indoor grow on a grandfathered medical marijuana or personal use lot in those R1, R2.5, or smaller R5 lots where those are allowed. So this rule would not be applicable in those zones. It's only going to be applicable in those RR5 zones, lots greater than 2.5 acres with recreational marijuana. What it says is if you're an indoor grow on those in that zone, you have to have an odor mitigation system. It is outlined in the rules. I can go into those a little bit more detail if you want. There's also a waiver provision in there Basically, if there's an engineer statement for that fan or whatever you're putting in there to say that's what its purpose is, it'll pass, it'll be acceptable. Compost, OLCC does regulate compost. We regulate compost in the form of fill, but only in a riparian corridor or floodway. Proposed purpose, it would be to reduce potential for neighborhood conflicts or nuisances or adverse runoff. And basically what it says in those smaller residential lots, R1, R2.5, R5 less than 2.5 acres. If your compost pile is more than 100 square feet, you're going to have to store the compost in a secured waste receptacle or composting bin. That shouldn't be difficult for anyone since that is an OLCC requirement for a recreational grower. And the sites I visited, the compost piles were not that big. They would not have even qualified for that. Noise is another one. Current code, the RLDC does not address noise. However, the Sheriff's Office is charged with administering the excessive noise ordinance. We have received quite a few complaints about noise. Surprisingly, a lot of those complaints come from the agricultural areas where you would expect to have noise and where it would be protected by the right to farm laws. But basically we're saying that other than a fan for odor mitigation, there shall be no mechanically generated noise associated with production or processing of marijuana audible from adjacent properties 1 hour after sunset or prior to the sunrise. And keep again, that's just in those residential zones. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about the other letter that we had received that affects the amendments that I handed out. So the county, there's something in the state called the Citizen Involvement Committee, and it talks about how in counties you can have what they call citizen advisory committees. And at one time we had quite a few of them. Last year we were down to 2, this year we're down to 1. And the one CAC we did hear from was the Williams CAC. And basically they were requesting the ability to review all land use applications that come in for a commercial or industrial zone or anything related to cannabis. So in the amendment that you have before you, and I'll just walk you through where you can find the changes on that. If you go to page 4, you just see some language that says when you're processing a permit, you forward it to the CAC. It talks about timelines that would be involved, and the fact that they're able to comment back to you and you're to pass those comments on. Looking at page 7, you'll see more detail on that. It talks about the purpose of the Williams overlay. It's to establish land management regulations specific to those lands under the jurisdiction of the Williams Citizen Advisory Committee. The overlay establishes specific zoning codes to protect the Williams area rural lifestyle and character and to uphold the scenic rural landscape enjoyed by Williams residents. Specific land use regulations are further desired to preserve citizen safety and the rural nature within the Williams area communities, as well as the peace and amicable coexistence of neighbors within the overlay area. The overlay also creates a process to more thoroughly engage the CAC in land use decisions affecting the Williams area. And again, it would only apply to those lands that are in the Williams CAC area, which is basically the southeast corner of the county. It talks about that review process, that they get copies of land use applications. They're given 10 business days to review those applications. Anything they submit back to us, we'll forward on to the applicant. And if the CAC requests, they can, the application can be bumped up to a site plan review, meaning neighbor input and more involvement on that. The Williams area overlay that you see in there is just the first of some other amendments we'll probably see coming forward on that. We're actually beginning to work with the Williams area CAC on, we haven't had our first meeting yet, it's just been a lot of talk so far. I shouldn't say a lot, but we're looking at going out there actually with that community and doing some visioning, help them set goals for their area, and then identify maybe some rules or management tools to help them reach their goals for that area. They're very excited, I think, to get into that planning process, and it's something we look forward to working with them. So probably in about 6 months or so, you'll see us back here with some amendments for that. You read through the letter, or I'll just real quickly read. Well, it's pretty much what I read is what the letter says. And that is it. Those are the amendments that I proposed before you. Now, you're going to hear a lot of comments. You're going to hear a lot of urging you to hold off and not make a decision tonight. I'll tell you from staff's perspective, we would rather have the same commissioners that gave me the directive back in June, and the same ones that were at the town hall meetings and heard the comments from the public. It's staff's preference that those same commissioners also act on any proposal you have. So although I'm sure your people ask you to delay this until we have a whole new set of commissioners, I'd advise you against it because we're basically starting over from scratch again then. The other thing is, any recommendations you make tonight, you can pass it on as is, you can recommend they not be approved, you can change them, but whatever you do recommend will then be forwarded to the Board of Commissioners. We'll have a public hearing on the matter. They'll be given basically the same presentation, but with the recommendation that you forward to them. So with that, I am done, but I'll take any questions you have.
Any questions? I do have a couple questions. One, is the 8-foot fencing requirement, does that also apply to personal grounds, which are for plants or that personal use?
No, the old CC rule would only be for that if you had a license.
Okay, great. Where medical marijuana are grandfathered in, are the setbacks apply to not just to the current plants that are planted and will then be harvested, but to the siting where they are in the future, they can still plant. And does that, is that grandfathered in, is that transferable with the property if the property is sold, or if someone buys the property then go back and we?
No, and one thing with all of these, whenever you have anything that's grandfathered, so when you get a license from the state, it's given to an individual. When you get a medical marijuana card, it's given to an individual. So those are not transferable to others. Whereas when you get a permit from the county, that goes with the land. So
a waiver is not transferable. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. And, on the lighting one, it says that it's an amendment to Article 75 off-street parking, Section 75060E parking area improvements. And because this is going to apply beyond just parking areas now, I was thinking it might make sense to put that in a separate section or article rather than leave it under parking, because it's going to apply to more than just parking areas.
It does show up in another area, and I'll have to look for that offhand because I don't remember where, but so we put it in the parking thing because that's where people are used to looking for it, but then we also made it in a separate area so people understood it was common to everything.
On the waiver of the requirement for a home on the property, if it says that, however, for lots exceeding 2.5 acres in size in the R5 zone, this requirement can be waived provided one of the lots the landowner owns or tenant leases used for the production of marijuana has a dwelling on it. Does that only apply if those lots are contiguous?
No.
So someone can have 5 lots in various parts of the county, as long as they have a home on one of them, then they can grow marijuana on the others.
That is correct, and the thought process on that was they could hop to, they could live in their home, and then go drive around and check their fields as if you were a potato farmer, so they would not have to be contiguous.
So as long as they have one home on one lot, then they can have other lots. All right, thank you very much.
Peggy?
Any other questions? It's Commissioner Richardson.
Okay, I had a couple of questions. one of which is ORS 215.213 and 215.283 that talk about farm use. I tend to get confused between the exclusive farm use and our rural residential. But what I didn't see in this document was the regulation of processing. And those two documents both allow for processing and farm stands. And that would seem to me to open a real can of worms if adjacent to every rural residential 5 lot, there is a little farm stand selling marijuana.
Okay. The farm stand, that would not be allowed by state law. And then with the RR5, they cannot do processing in a residential district. So just so everybody understands too that the county's definition of production and processing are slightly different than the state's definition. So when the county says production, that means you can grow it, you can dry it, you can package it. When we say processing, that means you're actually extracting or doing that value added, and then you have to be in a zone that allows processing. And processing is not allowed in a residential zoning district.
Then the next question, when we talk about Article 61 on what constitutes or what can go into a rural residential zone, we already exclude commercial feedlots, which I assume. Now, is that because of odor? Is that because of something else? How does that stand against the state saying that it is what it is for agriculture?
I was not here when that was put in there, but just using a planning mind, I would say because it was commercial and you're in a residential zone.
How is that different from marijuana commercial production that also has an odor and waste and whatnot problem? It seems that they are very similar in nature.
I would say this, the county does have the ability to prohibit commercial growing or commercial recreational in the rural residential zones if they want to. The reason why I did not propose it, of course, is because I know that is where, as we talk about, where we know a lot of it is occurring and where the LUCs have been submitting for.
Okay, so is that something then that also needs to change, where we say that farm uses shall not interfere with the use of adjoining residential properties? Because I think that's going to be one of the complaints that you hear is someone's marijuana grow is infringing on my use and potential to resell my property.
We do hear that already, and as a matter of fact, there have been letters submitted in support and against, which I'll also read, but some of those letters do cover that as well.
But that hasn't changed in the amendments that you proposed, has it?
Correct. Right.
Commissioner Gardner?
I have tried to understand the fencing requirement from the state in particular, and seeing the county struggling with, it's been fraught with difficulty on so many levels. I don't know, but my understanding is that the state legislature will be reconvening in January. And correct me if I'm wrong, maybe someone knows more than I do, but it seems that the state has gotten a lot of complaints about the fencing requirement, and it's possible, I think, that the state could be reconsidering that. Has Josephine County considered going to the state legislature to ask them to remove this requirement, or to have a more orderly approach to it?
Yes, we have. We talked to our state representative and complained about the confusion to the public and the lack of coordination between the state and the county. We've also shared that with the OLCC.
While we're on the subject of fencing, I'd like to point out that there's an absolutely wonderful horticultural practice called the hedgerow that could be made of drought-tolerant native plants that would truly enhance the rural character of our county. They take a little bit longer, but they grow pretty fast, actually. And we could possibly encourage people to plant hedgerows of native plants that would use very little water and make our county more beautiful. But that would be a matter of encouraging rather than kind of enforcement regulating, I think.
Well, it's not the county that's requiring those fences.
But it is in the county's interest, isn't it, to have a response?
It is, and I have to agree with you, Christine. I think a lot of people would rather see,
A living fence.
yeah, a living fence versus a barrier.
And it might encourage good neighborliness.
I agree.
I'd like to see some reference to that in our discussion about fencing, and I'll be sure to include that in my.
Well, I think if the county, if the direction is for us to proceed with some BMPs on things, some best management practices, I think that's definitely the place where we'd probably want to put that, make it available for anyone who's interested.
Is there any word from which way the state is likely to do this next year, or is it still crystal ball gazing?
I don't know the update on that.
Any further questions? Okay. Yes, Mr. Little.
More of a clarification than anything. I did a little research on the fencing, and my understanding is that the rule OAR 845.025.1470C is an OLCC administrative rule. It's not an ORS or a revised statute. So therefore, the legislature doesn't, am I correct? They don't have anything that they have to convene to change that rule. Only the OLCC, they can change it without legislative action. Is that correct?
I'm not sure how. I'm not sure what that did, but you are correct. It is an OLCC rule.
Yes.
And some of the OMMP rules also talk about that.
I read the ORSs, and all they talk about is security, and which is okay, but the OLCC implemented that security by making that a standard in their administrative rule.
Right, and the OLCC, keep in mind, they don't require it on every one.
I understand. They have exceptions, but if you read those exceptions, they require a lot of, it's a lot of ambiguity there. I'm sure that's why nobody is using those exceptions.
That could be.
Yeah.
That could be.
Okay.
Chair, would you want me to read the letters in support and against right now, or wait until we're done with public comments?
We might as well do that now, and
Okay.
this is public comment. That is public comment that is coming prior to this meeting, so that's good.
Commissioner Gardner, you're going to talk about your comments, the copy you sent me, or did you want me to read that?
I think
Okay. So the first one received is from Dr. Christine Gardner, and thank you, Ms. Schmelzer, for opening the dialogue for protecting the rural character of Josephine County rural lands. Our county watersheds, these natural open spaces, are very important to the people who live here and to those who travel to visit our county. I appreciate recognition of the importance of regulating impervious surfaces to protect the rural land character. From the perspective of geography and watershed, the increase in impervious surface has been clearly linked with the decline of salmon spawning in rivers. Regulation of impervious surfaces does not need to be a financial hardship and can open economic opportunities for local contractors. With respect to Josephine County rural landscape character, limiting impervious surface is a cost-effective way to address the need to protect the public water supply of rivers and salmon. I'm glad to see that Goal 10 addresses the impacts of increasing urbanization and light pollution. Since the Dark Skies Initiative in the 1990s, many communities around the world have begun to protect dark skies for the benefit of birds and mammals that navigate by night. Regarding the impacts of cannabis cultivation on county lands, fencing is a requirement from the state of Oregon, not the county. I suggest that the county ask Representative Carl Wilson for assistance with removing this unnecessary requirement from state law, and he is the one we spoke to about that, Christine. If the county wants to encourage privacy screening, let's take a longer-term view. There's an excellent set of guidance for the horticultural practice called the hedgerow. It's basically a living fence planted with the intent to become a screen. Using native plants on drip irrigation, the low-maintenance hedgerow fence could greatly enhance the rural land character and the ecological productivity of our county landscapes. Josephine County Commissioners could partner with the county garden clubs and OSU Extension to offer assistance and education to the public on how to design, install, and maintain hedgerow fences. Now is a good time for the county to recognize the distinction between marijuana and cannabis. Please see the editorial submitted this evening for a detailed explanation. And Christine left that on the front table for anyone that was interested. Let's be clear, marijuana is an 80-year-old federal corporate fraud framed in 1937. Cannabis is medicine for humans and mammals. Let our public dialogue be informed by the facts of American history with concern for the patients who chose to use this plant medicine. The state legislature is sure to produce new rules in the 2017 session. I suggest that Josephine County adopt a cannabis policy to encourage the sustainable production of organic plant medicine to serve the needs of patients. I strongly recommend that we defer further efforts to regulate cannabis cultivation until the new commissioner board is established. And just a comment which I had shared with Christine on that was that the reason why the proposed rules use the term marijuana instead of cannabis is because that is what OLCC uses too. So we're just being consistent on that. I did receive another one. I live in O'Brien and can't attend the meeting, but I have read and support the proposed regulations for growing marijuana in residential zones. Residential zones are for family homes and should not be used for growers of commercial or medical marijuana. That was from Helen Early. I also received another one. Before you amend the development code to include a code enforcer for alleged violations of code, I urge you to review the past Josephine County referendum that substantially overturned prior legislation, which included a code enforcer for the county government. And that was from Helen Scott. And just a clarification, I think she means the actual enabling ability, because we do have a code enforcer on staff. We have for years. I have read most of the proposed text amendments to Josephine County Rural Land Development Code. And I am of the persuasion that the proposed changes are in no way strict enough. And that was from Philip Southman of Cape Junction. And then I have a very long one. I'm going to try and summarize it. It's 9 pages.
Please summarize.
I'm going to try my best, okay? And I'm going to use my speed talking voice. I believe these proposals to be woefully inadequate to address the impacts and conflicts that have arisen from unregulated rush to transform all available rural residential zone properties into commercial marijuana grows. Available properties are not limited to lands and residences generally found on the local real estate market. Many of these properties are being sold by people and families leaving the area and state due to the many impacts caused by marijuana grows, especially on the smaller, on the 10 acres and under. My own business has suffered as clients have taken their horses and moved away to escape the odor and related activities of the new marijuana industry. Marijuana grows are replacing these residences and their pets or pleasure horses that supply jobs to local farriers, veterinarians, and trainers. Most rural residential zone properties have until now been used mainly for rural residences. These properties have provided a refuge for people who desire and could afford the privacy of a buffer of small acreage between themselves and their neighbors while not having to be subjected to the impacts of living next to a farm, a commercial industrial operation, or in a town. Prior to marijuana production, very few of these properties produced commercial agricultural products. They were small in operation and with no discernible impacts on neighboring properties. The Oregon State Legislature passed a law, and then they amended it to give counties the ability to do the time, place, and manner rules. He talks about odor mitigation. He says the only odor mitigation proposed on these properties is for odor control systems incorporated into new structures. He's correct on that. And he goes on to suggest densities established by this zone for developing areas are intended to ensure that development does not exceed the carrying capacity of the land to support sewage disposal systems, consumptive groundwater withdrawal, and environmental quality. The marijuana plant's natural odor violates environmental quality, specifically air quality. Goes on to talk about Article 61, farm uses shall not interfere with the use of adjoining residential properties. Many people ventilate and cool their homes by keeping the windows open. When the odor of the marijuana grow is so strong that one cannot open their windows or breathe fresh air or invite guests over, they're having their personal space and effects permeated by the smell, then the odor has interfered with the use of adjoining residential properties. This robs residents of the value of the use of their personal property and violates Article 61. To ignore this impact to neighboring residential properties by default is reclassifying rural residential zone properties to exclusive farm and forest zones. This order represents a significant adverse impact to neighboring properties. Few marijuana growers are willing to acknowledge the severity of the impact the odor of the plants has on other properties. It is without doubt any reasonable person without prejudice that has experienced this odor would consider it serious and a significant adverse impact. This botanical odor is not merely a foul smell, it is an irritant. Many people with diminished lung capacity, etc., find it difficult to breathe. Article 61 says farm uses shall not constitute a sanitation or health hazard. As the irritant quality of the odor results in respiratory distress, it violates Article 61 and constitutes a health hazard. Odor from outdoor grows must be addressed. The same criteria and law being applied to indoor grows should be applied to outdoor grows. Due to the enormous volume of complaints and conflicted associated with the impacts of these particular growing operations, the public should be allowed to voice their opinion whether to continue commercial marijuana growing in rural residential zones. Therefore, I suggest that the best way to represent the public voice and interest is to refer this issue to the public for a vote at the general election. His proposals: first, do a ban refer to the public at next general election a ban on marijuana production and processing in rural residential zone properties. Second, all marijuana production and processing on rural residential zone properties must be endorsed with an odor control system. This does not apply to plants allowed for personal use. He talks about the grandfathered status. He doesn't like any of the grandfathering, is my understanding from this. And it basically says that it's allowing unlimited grandfathered rights. Most grandfathered exceptions should only allow a reasonable amount of time, and after that they should be forced to come into compliance. His proposal is exception to dwelling on a grandfathered medical marijuana grow site should not be transferable. It should expire at transfer of ownership, and grandfathered grows should be given a reasonable time to comply with the setbacks. There's no reason to allow a reduction in setback. These are new plant locations. All sites should comply with the setbacks for new locations. He talks about pre-existing buildings used for marijuana production. He's saying that the pre-existing buildings should be retrofitted for the odor control systems. To grandfather properties and exempt owners from ordinances relevant to this goal in perpetuity will not address or improve the reasons these amendments have been proposed. In short, little to nothing will be changed from the current level of impacts and conflicts. He talks about camping associated with marijuana crops, and that the campers, if there's a house involved, then their campers are just going to go use their restroom, and he didn't think that was right. He talks about fences. With regard to the deer overlay, this outlines critical overwintering habitat. These properties present an impenetrable maze of obstacles for deer, cutting off travel corridors and isolating habitat. It is reasonable to suspect that with the lack of permitting required for these particular fences, that black-tailed deer habitat is being impacted. His proposal, amendment to require all undeveloped rural residential zone properties to be reviewed for wetland, flood hazard, and critical deer habitat prior to any agricultural development. Amendment should also require all rural residential property to be reviewed for critical deer habitat prior to the construction of marijuana fences. As far as enforcement goes, he doesn't like it at all. It should not. He's saying that the enforcement should only apply to the marijuana industry and no other use in the common code. This temporary bubble has caused property taxes to increase while destroying the marketability of rural residences. No one is opposed to people profiting from the use of their property, but it cannot be at the expense of others. And that's it. And that was those were the only legislators.
Who said that from?
That was from Raymond Smith.
All right, thank you. I would like to remind the audience not to converse during the hearing because I've noticed that the level of noise just keeps rising in the audience, and there are some people who have difficulty hearing, and so we want to be considerate of everybody. So if you have comments that you need to say to your neighbor or somebody else, please take it out into the lobby and keep it to a low decibel level. All right, we will now proceed to comments from citizens. And the first comment will be from Peter Gendron. Am I pronouncing that right?
That's correct.
Please state your name and before you.
Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Peter Gendron. I'm a Sunny Valley resident. I've been in Josephine County for over 2 decades now. My wife and I have been on our property in Sunny Valley, growing cannabis legally under Measure 67 since it passed in 1998. I'm here also tonight to represent the Oregon Sun-Grown Growers Guild as its president, and I am also here to say specifically that I believe that what I've just heard, which was essentially 75 minutes worth of prohibition and restriction, needs to be put on the table until after the election. I understand that the 4 hearings that we had in Josephine County this summer were held under our current commissioners, at least one of which is no longer going to be serving in 2017 when this becomes applicable, when it's really going to be enacted into county laws. Julie Schmelzer illustrated herself just the meetings with the Williams CAC won't have an official report to the committee until April. What's going to happen between now and April is something that the Josephine County Planning Commission needs to be looking at very seriously when they make the decision whether or not to forward these recommendations to the county commissioners tonight. We recommend that they do not, and I will tell you why. Not just as president of the Guild, but having served on the OLCC's Licensing, Compliance, and Enforcement Committee myself, having also served as an appointee of the Governor's Office to the Task Force on the implementation of Senate Bill 844, and been an advisor to the legislature for the last 2 years, I can address some of the comments that came up in that first 60 minutes of prohibitionist rhetoric. There was nothing in the 30-plus pages of justification for 10 pages of new rules restricting this plant's growth in Josephine County. Nothing at all that addressed the legislative intent. There are 2 types of language when it comes to state law. There is the actual codified language, as pointed out, written in ORSs and OARs, and there is the intent of the legislature and the intent of the bureaucracies, the regulating agencies that develop that language. At the state level, the permission, and it is a permission, to regulate based on time, place, and manner, that permission is based on following the intent of the OLCC, the Oregon Health Authority, and the state legislature itself. Having worked and continuing to work very closely with our bureaucratic and legislative representatives, I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, we are working on addressing like fencing issues. We are addressing things like smell, of all things. Smell is coming up again. When Representative Wilson came out to my farm and he smelled the cannabis plants on my property, he had one thing to say after smelling 3 different varieties of medicinal cannabis that we grow there legally. And what he said was, well, I guess the discussion of smell is out the window now. Yet here it is on the table again, clearly in contravention of legislative intent. I don't just speak as somebody who is respected at the state level as an expert in this field. I would also have you consult with other members of our board of directors for the Oregon Sun-Grown Growers Guild. We served on the Environmental Best Practices Committee. Our executive director served on the Growers Committee. Our previous president and current board member also served on the Maine Rules Advisory Committee. Our friends and allies served for the Advisory Committee on Medical Marijuana. When we're talking about regulated OLCC grows in Josephine County, we're talking about 80 currently licensed applicants compared to well over 2,000 people in Josephine County that have been growing their medicine for themselves and their neighbors since Measure 67 passed in 1998. This is not something new. It is not suddenly a problem which requires immediate action. It's something that requires a thoughtful approach and will receive a thoughtful approach. We believe firmly that
You have 30 seconds.
our efforts
You have
at the
30 seconds to
legislature,
summarize your comments.
through our efforts at the legislature in 2017, we know these issues are going to be addressed. And we not only know they're going to be addressed, we know they're going to be addressed in a bipartisan, bicameral fashion, and we have support from legislators that says that our bills will be non-controversial, they'll be passed rapidly and in time to be enacted before May of 2017, which is crucial to our sun-grown season. And we request that the Planning Commission respect that and withhold any action at this time. Thank you very much.
The audience not to applaud because we have a very large number of people to get through tonight in testimony, and the applause just takes up time. So we're going to try and move along very quickly tonight, and your approval or disapproval will be expressed in your own comments. I neglected to mention that Mr. Church, who is keeping time, will be giving each speaker a 30-second warning at the end of your 5 minutes. So please, when he gives you your warning, start to summarize. So because we just, with this many people, we just cannot afford to do that all the time. All right, the next person who will speak will be Larry West.
My name is Larry West, Grants Pass. And what I've heard tonight was a very professional presentation. It's really to its roots demonstrated courtesy, consideration, and respect for all people, moreover than what's right here tonight represented. So I really like the idea of what I heard. Very professional again. I thought it was very extensive, and I like the process. So this is a keeper. Thank you very much. Thank our staff very much.
All right. And the next person will be Bill Hunter.
Bill Hunter, Maryland. I have a couple of things. I think I can get through them rapidly. One is that when we say that we're here to help and work with the entire community, and then you do schedule this on Halloween, I think that there's a real problem with working with the community. If this was the very last day that you had to do this, why didn't you do it 4 days before, 3 days before, 2 days before?
Please hold the applause. We do want to move this on.
And in the instance of transparency, I would like to say that the ad hoc committee, I'd like to have their names available because an ad hoc committee is only as valuable as the people who served on it, and the public deserves to know who served on the ad hoc committee. The last thing I have to say, we are in a huge transition. We're in transition nationally, we're in transition with the county, and to saddle an old administration, new administration with an old administration's agenda is never fair at the state level, at the national level, or at the county level. And I have tried to follow and become educated regarding marijuana. And what I have watched is that there's an enormous amount of churn at the state level, and it continues. I've been in meetings where the OLCC people are here who regulate marijuana, and they say we're as frustrated as anybody because we go out and we tell somebody they can do something, we come back to that afternoon and we rip our facts off and find out we just told them wrong, and it changes again. And I can tell you this, as a business person, if you've missed your goal on what you're going to get for taxes by 5 times, and so far that's where they are, you're going to go back to the table, folks. And the year isn't even out yet. And so you do not have a group in Salem who has put their feet in the ground and are settled on virtually anything. So when we could work for weeks on fences, and Salem could say, you know what, no more fences. They could work on order control or whatever we want to spin our wheels with, and Salem just right after that can say, you know what, we're not going to do that anymore. Or we're going to do something different or something new. So I think that for us to spend our county time and our county resources and our county effort, while the state is absolutely just in churn over what they're going to do about marijuana in the state of Oregon, we're overstepping our bounds. Thank you.
Thank you for voting for me. All right, the next person speaking will be Mark Sullivan.
Who cares if they have
Good evening, distinguished members. Mark Sullivan, 20-year resident of Josephine County. I just want to know who I'm talking to. My question is to all of you. In the last 10 years, how many of any of you have smoked pot? Raise your hand. Last 10 years. One. Thank you. Okay, I didn't know. All right, now.
Please hold the applause. They're taking away the
Josephine County, 10 years ago, had an unemployment rate of 11%. Its unemployment rate now is 7%. There's no big thing happening here that brings money in this county except the cannabis industry, okay? There are 2,500 grow sites. Each grow site spends $10,000 minimum. That's for supplies. That's $25 million going into the local economy. It hires people and it lowers that. Anything you do here tonight that impacts upon that will hurt the economy. Okay. I passed out a flyer, Cannabis Regulations and Private Property Rights. Josephine County Commissioners, through the Planning Department, through Cheryl Walker, the liaison, are attempting to regulate medical marijuana grows. Now, I'm talking about medical, not recreational. On rural residential land, more restrictive than state law. This will hurt growers and patients alike. It will also hurt the local economy. What I'm hearing tonight is about a plan, for heaven's sakes. And this is a plan that can make Josephine County, put it on the map and make it successful. You should be here encouraging this, not trying to regulate. You have 5% people that are doing this wrong, and you're trying to regulate for the rest of them. Granted, there are some people that are unscrupulous in this. There's no doubt about that, but it's like that in any other industry. So why hurt the 95% by these restrictive laws, one after another after another? I think we should join together to protect growers and patients' rights together. Now, our county voted down code enforcement officers through the nuisance stuff a couple of years ago. If you look at the last one of the last paragraphs on this document, it says there will be code enforcement officers. And how will they be paid for? They will be paid for by levies. What levy? We have a levy going on right now. This levy is supposed to be used only for the sheriff's department. Well, guess what? It's going to be used for these code enforcement officers. Now, you want us to trust the government? You know the phrase, "Hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you"? Okay, fine. Real estate values. Real estate values are not down. Real estate values are up. Okay, so anybody that tells you that Jim Frick, Century 21, will tell you real estate values are up. 2.5 acres, okay? 2 people are growing. They got 6 plant seats. They got 4 recreational. They want to grow for Joe Blow. They can't do it. So they restricted his medical supply. Let's say he lives in the city of Grants Pass. He can't grow. So what does he do? He goes to a grower. Sorry, I can't grow on 2.5 acres or less. That's not fair. We asked the Planning Commission to respect the hundreds of people who came to numerous town hall meetings. Why are you even having this tonight? The town hall meetings showed 85% of the people were against restrictions. So if you want to be representative of those people that came to the town hall meetings, what you do here, you do minimally. Further, the state will have their own say, as Bill Hunker has said. You are an arm of local government. You are us. You must stand with us. Bill Hunker spoke very eloquently about this. The people have spoken at these town hall meetings. We expect the distinguished commission members to yield to the will of the community. As far as odor goes, you need to know that the Appellate Court of Oregon ruled that odor of marijuana, cannabis, is not offensive. So anything you say about odor, check out the Appellate Court ruling, because that seems to be a biggie here. Please do not restrict medical access or infringe upon these growers' rights. We are an agricultural community. We should be benefiting the small growers, not the large recreational concerns. Jackson County has done this in reverse. The recreational concerns, they want these large grows because they can keep a bigger eye on it. The smaller ones, the small farmer, we're a small farming community, and we always have been a small farming community. Are you going to do the same thing to tomatoes and strawberries and corn and stop these people from selling at the growers' market? I think not. Now,
you have just 30 seconds to summarize.
We need to postpone this or reject this completely. Cheryl Walker, who is the liaison, is a medical marijuana grower and exclusive farmland. There's a bias there. We need to elect people like Bill Hunker for county commissioner because he will defend the rights of growers and patients and the community and is reasonable. Thank you.
All right, the next person who will speak will be Joseph Wright.
Good evening, Joseph Rice. I was listening to this, and I have some issues, naturally. When we look at code enforcement, we are talking about a single crop. In the rural R5, how many vineyards fall under this? And is this code enforcement going to extend into vineyards? The 100-foot setback, the 10 and the 25, where did that come from? How did that number arrive at? Where did they arbitrarily get that number from? You know, we're looking at a code enforcement with this community in Josephine County has time and time again said no, no, no. I don't know how many times the government needs to hear no. The government gets its authority from the governed. That's us, we the people sitting out here in the audience. I ran some numbers and I saw that stunning number of over 100 complaints. So as I looked at 85,000 citizens in this county, I rounded up to 120 complaints. That represents 0.0014% of the population in Josephine County that complained. The appellate court in Josephine County has already ruled that odor is subjective. It's not objective. It's just the way we look at it. You cannot regulate odor. The county has lost our economic foothold. We've lost it with timber, we're losing it with mining, we're losing it in a variety of our agricultural areas. There will be something that will replace it. The citizens of Oregon have legalized this, and now entrepreneurs sitting in this audience and in the county are taking advantage of that. Yet as we heard Mr. Gentry say earlier, these are prohibition-type tactics. There is a broad and robust discussion taking place in the state and how to move forward with this. If we are going to regulate one type of agricultural plant within this county, what's the next one? Is it going to be hops for the microbrew industry? Vineyards that produce alcohol and wine? Where does it end? Where does it stop? The other thing that I would bring into it is what's the implementation cost of this? How much more can we as taxpayers afford as we implement these types of regulations, which sounds will be constantly revised and changed and revised and changed, and people trying to be compliant with the law will always have a moving target. When we look at the economic impact to the county, people are struggling, and we have found a new industry that is bringing the economy back in Josephine County. Yes, there's going to be a clash. It was voted in by the people. They have the opportunity to vote and move with their feet, sell their homes and move on if they don't like the values of the community where it's going. So one thing I would bring into point, in 2004, Measure 37 was passed by 61% in Josephine County. This is something that the Planning Commission needs to look at. It allows the government, state, and local governments to waive land use regulations. And if those land use regulations impact or reduce the value of property, they must compensate that property owner. Now, as Mr. Seligman said, we're having a real estate boom in Josephine County. There are properties that are worth much more than they were a year ago. If these regulations come into effect, you can effectively be reducing those property values, and the county will take the liability to compensate those owners for the reduced values. That would be a direct impact of these regulations. I think at this point, it needs to be tabled until after the election, until after a new set of commissioners are installed, and there's more input from the community and better guidance from the state. Again, Halloween night's inappropriate. Thank you.
The next person to speak will be Stacey Hanley.
Seem to be the only non-career politician here talking tonight. I have some pictures. May I come up and bring these to you? You guys? Okay. If you can pass these around, this is my property. Okay? I didn't know we were going to. Okay. Thank you. So I am here in support of this amendment. I live in a rural residential area. You've got the pictures. Been there almost 19 years. And got along great with my neighbors. Neighbor, 60 years living at that property, passed away, both him and his wife. Son went and rented the land out to a grower. So they came in, tore it up, put their plants in. Long story short, I mean, very nice man, very nice young man. I don't have any neighbor conflicts like others do, at all. What my conflict is that I had my property devalued, in my opinion. My view is gone. You can see by the fences, the pictures of the fence. I don't really have people over, my kids' families. I mean, to me, there is an odor. I'll be honest, I don't think it's horrible. I'm not going to lie to you guys. It's an odor and you can smell it, but it's more of what it comes into my air conditioning that bothers me. It does. It comes into your home and it is in your air conditioning. You can't open your windows at night if you don't want to smell it. I think the part that's really hard on me is when it goes into your car and you go someplace and you get out and they're like, oof, you a grower? No, I'm not a grower. But it's there. So the odor is there, you guys. Whether, all the people who are okay with that. If you're not a grower, it's offensive. And it is there for me. A couple things that was brought up. Mr. Sullivan, you brought up that it's a plant. I'm going to tell you, and you talk about tomatoes and hops, Mr. Rice and agricultural products, but this is a plant that's still federally a drug. Okay? So it isn't just a plant. Kids that are trading it on buses for Skittles and things, it's not just a plant, you guys. And it's out there in our neighborhoods now, in rural residential areas. And I don't believe in medical marijuana. That's my personal opinion, okay? But I think it's hurting our families in this area. I think it is invading rural residential areas, kids. I have grandkids. My children are grown up. I have one left at home, but he's going off to college. So I've already instilled my beliefs in him, but the grandchildren that are coming, they can get over there. I have people come down my driveway now. I have to keep my gate locked at all times. I have people that come down there. They want to see that site, that grow site. I'm not going to be shooting at people that come down my driveway. I just think that it's best to keep it out of the residential areas. That's why I'm here to talk about that. I also think that there's a lot of thought that's been put into this. I know some people came up here and said that there wasn't a lot of thought put into this. I think Julie did a great job of presenting this, and I think that there has been a lot of thought going into this. It's been going on now for a while. So I thank you, Julie, for that time that you put into it. So that's really all I have to say on that. I don't know what the grandfather, I know all the things that you talked about with the grandfathering, but I don't even get that. If I can ask a question. You said the Lux, what is that exactly? Can I get? Because I'm not as familiar as all these other people.
Could you answer that, please?
Okay. Said only if they had the permit by October 1st. What?
Okay, so the LUX is the land use compatibility statement that is required by the state. And what that form does is it just says that the county has to sign off on it, agreeing that the production of marijuana is allowed in that zoning district. That's what the law says.
So if they had the permit to grow it this year, are they grandfathered in?
So what happens is that LUX goes off to the state, and if the state approves it, they get a license, and then they would be grandfathered if they had the license. Some of the people that apply for LUX do not get a license out of it because they either don't pay to get the license, or they don't pass the background check, or they don't follow it.
So I sent the pictures so that you guys could see how invasive that is in our area. I mean, that's pretty, it's right there. I mean, it's within inches of my house. I have a nice front porch. If I want to sit out there now, I sit out there and look at black plastic. That's what I look at.
You have
So,
30 seconds to summarize.
You know, my big thing would definitely be the rules on these fencings, along with how far it can be away from people. And of course, I think in the rural residential area, it should be prohibited. Thank you very much.
All right, the next person to speak will be Kathleen Doyle.
Good evening. I'm Kathleen Doyle, and I live in a rural residential neighborhood south of Grants Pass. I don't have an opinion about marijuana, separate from what's happening right now. My position is really based on what's happening in my neighborhood, my experience lately. We have a great neighborhood. Like, people are pretty united, we all know each other, very, very friendly. And many of us that aren't here tonight, we feel like we're losing our lifestyle. And this has to do with pot grows being moved into our neighborhood. We don't agree with the idea that it's just an odor. We actually have people that are very, very sick from the odor. And I have a friend who has COPD, and she has to wear a face mask now in her house, and she has to keep all of the windows closed because she cannot breathe. She actually cannot breathe because she has a grower right next door to her. Now, so that's really important to see. It's not an odor, it's a health condition. We have a lot of seniors living in the rural areas. And does that mean that we don't care about their health? I think that we have to protect people's health before anything else. So I've lived here 24 years in the same place, and this is the first year that my neighborhood has felt it's really important to establish a citizen watch group. Up to this time, we all felt pretty safe, but we have a lot of people now coming into our neighborhood that we don't know, that don't have any stake in our neighborhood, and they're parking their cars, they're wandering around, and people are generally feeling very unsafe and feeling like we have to get gates and better locks and all that. We worry about the groundwater because we have, in dry years, we have really low groundwater. We worry about any kind of like mass growing close to us here. That would affect our wells and our water. So if you look around the county, you can see, we've talked about the visual eyesores that you see around the county, and that includes like the shoddy fences and the makeshift shelters, sprawling encampments, porta potties, and we've even spotted several armed guards. So it's not a good feeling. So I really urge the Planning Commission to take a really long view about this. If you give it a thumbs up, the pot grows, I really believe, and a lot of us really believe, that the quality of rural life in Josephine County is going to decline. And you can say, oh yes, the price of houses is up right now because realtors are selling to people that want to grow. But those of us that live right next door to the pot grows, the value of our property is going down. There's no doubt about that. I have a neighbor who, she and her husband spent 2 years building their house on my street. And they lived in a camp while they built it. They finally got it done, and a pot grow moved in right next door to them. And they say they can't go out. They can't sit on their deck anymore. And it really, it's very, very important to understand it is a breathing and a health issue, not just an odor. So I really, really urge you to adopt the same ruling that the Land Use Board of Appeals passed and handed to Jackson County last month. And that is, they ruled that grows must be limited to designated farmland, not allowed in rural residential neighborhoods. And they base this on the negative impacts that Jackson County reported, which are really similar to a lot of what you're hearing tonight. And I would refer you to the Medford Tribune online, because they have the whole article of how that case occurred and how they decided that. And basically, LUBA is the Land Use Board of Appeals, and they decide cases very similarly that are close together. So I would say that I would take a real hard look at their ruling. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The next First person to speak will be Michael Thompson.
Good evening, Michael Thompson, Grants Pass, Oregon. Similar to other people here, I was born and raised here, born in 1970, went to Grants Pass High School, graduated in 1988, go Cavemen. Moved on to the University of Oregon, graduated there, go Ducks, we're not that good, give us a break. And then decided to go to Northwest Christian College where I got a master's in marriage and family therapy. I then did penance, i.e. I worked for the Lake County Department of Youth Services, counseling juvenile delinquents for 10 years, so was a juvenile delinquent, got to do my penance and got out of the way. So now I stand before you here with a recreational grow. I don't know if anybody else has talked about that just yet. I've spent 3 years up in the state of Washington working on recreational grows up there, opened a store up there. So I've got a little bit of experience in this recreational market. I have sat in on board meetings, whether it's with the American Credit Union to help the banking industry get involved in the marijuana. But I've also sat on many county commissioner meetings, city council meetings, etc. So I have a fairly good understanding of how this has happened in another state and how this can happen here as well. One of the things that I have learned from the state of Washington, and I would assume this would apply here as well, is that if you over-regulate or over-tax anything, you now end up with the decision, a lot of people do, of to play cat and mouse. The question is do we want to have as many cats as we do mice? We've got a lot of mice out here. So do we really want to have an enforcement system that puts a tax out there that is going to create an untenable situation? What wasn't mentioned tonight, and I think it should be mentioned, is that there was no mention of the per plant that is also proposed in this. That's $20 per plant on licensed grows, whether they're recreational or medical. The idea behind this that I have heard as of last week from our county commissioners was that the idea was to help identify what's a rec grow and what is a illegal grow, meaning what are recreational and medical versus the illegal grows. That seems to be a big concern for the county, as in they can't go out to a grow and determine which is which. I used to work in law enforcement. One of the first things you do besides securing the sting is to start asking questions, such as, what's your name? Why are you here? Is this legal or not? Generally, when you ask questions, people will answer them, especially if they have the license to do so. We have a license to do so. We have an 8-foot fence that we got permission to do and got all the stuff. If we grow 6,000 plants a year, can anybody tell me what 20 times 6,000 is? It's $120,000 a year that this county would get for coming out to my piece of property to ensure that my fence is proper and my buildings are up to code. Does anybody here think that that service is worth $120,000? Let's call it $100,000. I dare say that that is overpaying for a service. So what I would ask you to consider is don't make this a cat and mouse game where you put up a number as in $20 per plant, which I assure you will make some of these legitimate grows go the opposite way, which again, coming from working in the state of Washington, there are people above the state of Oregon, as in the DEA and whatnot, that are watching very closely these illegal grows. I can tell you that when the inspector came out to my farm, and yes, the inspectors do come out, because that's been said that they don't, they do. It was told to me very clearly, watch and wait, meaning illegal grows in this state are being taken down. There was one in Curry County, there was one up in Marion County, thousands of plants per grow. Those things are coming down. Those are in the cartel industry. They're not part of our community. They're not part of our kids. So what we need to do is to bond together medical rec against the illegal grows. And again, I'm not going to personally go out and be a vigilante to get these people. No, I'm going to refer that to the authorities that we've put in charge of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
I
think we all probably have the same question. In reading through the ordinances, I didn't see anything about a $20 fee for plants.
No, that was something that the county commissioners were talking about to impose.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the problems with everything going on is there's a lot of hearsay and a lot of rumors going on. There is no fee proposed with what you have in front of you. What he is referring to is the county does a fee schedule, which will be, the commissioners will be discussing in November, in about a week. And in there was proposed a per plant fee for a compliance certificate. So if a grower wanted a compliance certificate to show that they're in compliance with the county codes, it would be $20 per plant. It was initially put on that way, but it was not finalized. It was a placeholder on there. The details had to be worked out. As a matter of fact, we've had conversations with two of the people that are in here right now that had recommended perhaps a sliding scale, perhaps there's a maximum $20, but perhaps you max out at $400, something to that effect. So there's a lot of things that are not true that I'm hearing sitting here. It's a little frustrating to sit there and listen to all this, but no, there is no fee associated with that. They're referring to a voluntary compliance fee that will be proposed with the fee schedule a week after next. Or it might be next week already.
Thank you for clarifying. All right. The next person to speak will be Paula Hagman.
Thank you. And you said it right, because most people get my name wrong. I'm here to address my concerns. I'm a property owner. I've had my property for 28 years in this county. We live in a rural residential 5-acre zoning. There are commercial pot grows in our residential neighborhood. Children should not have to grow up next to commercial pot grows for medical marijuana or recreational marijuana. We have the right to clean air. Some people are sickened by the smell. We should not have to put up with the smell from a commercial marijuana grow in our residential neighborhoods. Even, I looked forward to the rain this year, and even that didn't take the smell out of the air. These commercial pot grows in residential neighborhoods bring people into our area that are not vested in taking care of our neighborhood. The grows bring people from out of state, as shown by the license plates on the new traffic that we have in our neighborhood. We do not feel safe with the new people now coming and going in our neighborhood. The pot grows bring in thieves, not only to steal from the growers, but to steal from our neighboring homes as well. Many of the pot grows use our well water for their commercial business. This puts a stress on all of our well water, which is a finite resource. These pot grows will deter families from wanting to put down roots next to a pot farm, bringing down our property values for families due to the smell, unsightly encampments, strangers coming and going from our neighborhoods. Commercial, medical, and recreational marijuana grows should be on farmland that has water rights. We are against grandfathering in grows that have already been started. The term grandfathering in seems to imply that something has been in place for decades. Pot growers came in like a stampede for their plot to grow pot on, knowing regulations were not yet in place. Our county failed to set regulations up prior to the pot farmers setting up business in our neighborhoods, and that's not acceptable. Jackson County is enacting regulations to protect rural residents from medical commercial pot grows. If you're going to grandfather anything in, it should be our right to clean air, our right not to allow commercial, medical, and recreational pot farms. We have lived here for decades. I thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Peggy, is it possible we could take a break?
We've had a request to take a break. Let's take a vote on this. Everyone in favor of a break?
It's 2 hours, I think it's appropriate.
All right, we will take a 5-minute break. We will return at 8:03.
Site 803. I like your comment.
All right, we'll return at 8:05. We'll compromise and be a 7-minute.
Yeah, I was going to comment on your comment.
Please be respectful of speakers and do not talk. If you need to talk, please go out into the lobby to do so and talk, keep your voices down. We will be continuing right now at the next speaker. We'll be Jared Pan.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Baka Han. I am the love child of Han Solo and Chewbacca. I'd like to thank you guys for being here today. I know it's not everybody's ideal situation, but thank you all for showing up. Actually, my name is Jared Hanks, and I reside here in Grants Pass, and I have since '83. I consider this place my home, and I love this community, everything it has been, everything it is, and everything it will become. I just hope that you guys take into consideration the actions that you guys do here will have a ripple effect throughout the entire state. And right now, the state is looking for Josephine County to make the wisest decision for the greater good. And we talk about the greater good, we don't know what that is because we're sitting here, we're debating over smell. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I grew up here, I rode on a bus that got sprayed with fecal matter every single day because we drove by dairies and they blast their fecal matter, and if you didn't remember to roll up your window, guess who was getting pink eye? All of them. So we're sitting here today and we're talking about smells and odors. Has anybody ever lived next to a paper plant or a mushroom plant? I have, both of them. Horrible, horrendous smells. Horrible. At least marijuana's not horrible. I mean, think about it. We're going to sit here and we're going to talk about fresh air. You're breathing some of the freshest air you could possibly breathe if you're smoking cannabis. I mean, the oxygen content is much higher than anywhere else. If you want to breathe fresh air, go to LA and go complain to them. Okay? Let's talk about fresh air, because right now we have beautiful air. And the only problems that we really have down here, what? What are our problems? That we can't get along, that we can't play nice to one another, and that we can't look out for the greater good. The people that are hurting. I mean, you see my kids. They're back here. They're here on Halloween, and their father's interpreting for them because they're about to suffer because of some of the actions that we're making in here. There are more people in this nation that need cannabis. There are more people in this state and in this county that need cannabis than those that have opposed it. This is a need, not a want. I just watched and lost a friend of mine because he took blood pressure medicine and it had a counterintuitive effect to him, and now he's dead. We talk about doctors, they're practicing on patients. God has not been practicing. God knows what he's doing, and he's provided us with a plant. If you want to dispute it, it's our God-given right. Genesis 1:29, I give all seed-bearing plants unto thee. So if you want to dispute it on some different levels, honestly, I pull my hair out because I shouldn't be here today. I should be with my kids trick-or-treating. The fact that I have to come in here and talk about clean air and COPD. I was a firefighter for 16 years. Don't talk to me about clean air. I sucked it in. As a paramedic, I picked people up off the ground with COPD. I've seen people live in homes that were just mold infested and they don't care about themselves nor their neighbors. If you care about yourself, you'll do something about the conditions that you have. If you have COPD, that really sucks. But when fires hit in the summer, where do you go? When you're spraying pesticides over the place, what do you do then? Do they call you before they spray pesticides in your neighborhood so you can go ahead and put on your little mask? Or how does that work out exactly? Because what I see people going out and they don't really care. You guys are caring now because this has to do with marijuana, but nobody ever regulated the pesticides that are being dropped over my head. Nobody ever consulted me about it. We talk about noise. I got airplanes that are flying over me constantly, and I don't know if it's CHP, I don't know if it's feds, I don't know if it's cartel, I don't know who it is, but I don't like it, and somebody said it was okay for them to fly over my property every damn day. Deer habitat, don't play with me. Seriously, we all have fences. We all have raped and pillaged riparian zones. We've decimated the landscape, and we've neglected it to the point of catastrophic fires if we don't do anything about it.
So you have 30 seconds to summarize, please.
Deer. I want to talk about people that are dying of cancer, kids that are having seizures. I want to talk about my own family, PTSD. I want to talk about it all. But first we need to talk about patience, and that's number one, should always always be. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The next person to speak will be Marlene Margot. I'm pronouncing that right.
Hi, I'm Marlene Mangoland, and I'm a resident of Sunny Valley. And that last gentleman has brought me to tears because I've done this with passion from my heart to help people who have suffered. I want to thank you for your service to this county. And please do remember that you are serving the people, and please consider all of our comments. And I have been a patient, an OMMP patient, and a grower for many, many years, well over a decade. I lease property to a legal OLCC recreational grow that is here in Josephine County. I've helped many people by providing medicine to my patients throughout these years, and I have helped many people to get medicine to help them. Some of the ailments that they have suffered from include one of my patients currently, and I have helped him for many, many years, is a quadriplegic. I have a cancer survivor that is living well past what she was told of her death sentence because of the cannabis oil helping her. I have a glaucoma patient who has stopped losing his sight because of this wonderful God-given seed and herb. I have people with chronic pain. I have a friend who has rheumatoid arthritis that I have helped provide medicine for. And among other things, she can now walk after being in a wheelchair for 2 years. I have sorry to be so emotional, but like I said, this is something that is very passionate in my heart and in my soul. And I believe that by adding more restrictions from the state than the state already has put upon us is going to limit access to patients. Please listen to the majority of the people and follow our state guidelines that already have been given to us for our community. And please give our community the freedom to grow a plant that helps so many. There are already state guidelines and county codes that are not being enforced. Maybe we should consider enforcing some of these codes that are already in place from the state instead of wasting time putting other codes in place that I don't see how we're going to actually implement enforcing them. I believe it's in the best interest of our county to postpone or reject this proposal and take it any further. If you do decide to go any further, I believe that many people that would have attended this meeting are not here today, and a lot of people that I know myself are not here today because of the date that was chosen. They would be here to support, and a lot of us need to be more notified of meetings like this that we can help to support. I did not know of any of the other town meetings, or I would have been at them, and that's my own research neglect. The date that you chose tonight, being Halloween, as a grower and many other growers, this is the one day that I take off during harvest, and it's to be with my family and my 5 grandchildren. And I missed out on that tonight to be here to support the medical marijuana growers and the recreational growers in our county. And I do realize that you claim that you did not do this on purpose for this day, that there's this pressing time, but please put off the decision or just dismiss it totally, because having this on Halloween and on a night of trick-or-treat, it seems pretty tricky to me.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Rick Friedman.
Peggy, how many speakers are left?
We have a total of 43 speaker cards, and we've been through 11, so we're about quarter of the way through. Just for those of you who are concerned, there is no way we'll get through all of the speakers tonight. And at some point, hoping to get through half of them, if we can get through that by around 9:30, and then we will continue this to a time and date certain. But I would like to get through as many as possible tonight, so we don't have to continue it twice. Is Rick Friedman still here, or has he left? All right, then let's go on to Indra Nicholas.
Good evening, and thank you for your time. I really appreciate the work that was obviously a lot of work put into this. I'm just an average citizen of Grants Pass. I've lived here 20 years, moved here to raise my 4 children. I've lived both in the county, out in Murphy area. I've lived in the city. I'm a strong advocate of personal property rights. I am a believer in the medicinal purposes of marijuana, of cannabis. However, what I want to talk about is I'm very involved in the community. My kids went to school. I know a lot of parents. They played sports. I know sports people. I have a business in town. So I talk to a lot of people. And there's a big problem here. Since the recreational, just this past year, it's a big problem. So I, unlike some of the other speakers, I think it needs to be acted on now. I don't think we can wait for another season or changes or whatever. I think some things need to be put in place right away. I have 2 properties. One is a 5-acre, so R5, one's R05, but it's a 3-acre property. I got those properties or kept them for my children who are away. One's in the military. They're expecting a baby soon. I'm hoping that they will come back and live here in Grants Pass. Right now, I would not recommend that to them. I don't think this is a very family-friendly community anymore. And I love Grants Pass. I love the community. I love the family atmosphere. But I believe it's really deteriorating. And I think this is part of it. The wild grows everywhere. I do think that the odor is a real problem. On my one property of 3 acres, someone's growing. You can see them. You can smell it when I'm there working. I can't even go outside. I don't enjoy it. Does it make me sick? No. But it's not enjoyable. I wouldn't have friends over there. I wouldn't recommend that my son and his family move in there with young kids. I just wouldn't. I think whatever restrictions are put in place, there does need to be a lot of enforcement. Because when you said there are 64 legal applications, that's crazy because we know there's so much more out there. And so if it's not enforced, then what's the point of even having applications to grow? I don't think the rules or regulations go far enough. I don't think that there should be commercial grows in any rural residential area. For those of us that bought our property, our houses, we've lived there for years. We've enjoyed a great quality of life here. And then just because in the last year the people said, yes, we want recreational, and that's great. I mean, I'm for the majority people, even though I wouldn't personally grow or smoke it. I appreciate that we're in a democracy and that rules, but there really needs to be some regulations, some restrictions on it. So is it fair that I've had my home and property, I've enjoyed it, and now suddenly I can't enjoy it because people are coming in and growing all around? I don't think that's fair at all. And I don't think asking people to move out or grow a little farther out is asking too much. And I really think that we can all come to an agreement as a community. It is legal. Let's work it out. Let's come to an agreement where we all can say, yes, that's going to be okay. But in any rural residential where you have families and houses, I just don't think it's working. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next person to speak will be Jean Aguera. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Okay. I'm Gina Gare. I own 40 acres in a wildland interface in Williams, and I started working on Oregon land use laws in 1979. My issue is not pot. I've been around pot all my life, pot growing all my life, pot consumption most of my life. My issue is really gross violation of land use laws that I've seen the last 3 years, just in unprecedented ways. It's really impacting my property, my quality of life, everything you've heard. So, in educating myself about, wow, how is this happening? We've grown more pot in Josephine County than we'll all ever be able to calculate for all of these years. Why all of a sudden all of this irresponsible land use? I started with OLCC, and I think that there are a couple of misunderstandings here, maybe on my part. You can correct me. They say that there's no demand for the fence, that it's no LCC regulation, that they're weakening that regulation, they may even eliminate that regulation, and that they'll be opening a public comment period in, I think, late November on their fence rule. So, you know, it's up, I think, to us to put pressure on OLCC to dissolve, take away the fence rule. If we're going to regulate it temporarily or even permanently in Josephine County, why would we reinforce OLCC's fence law instead of returning to the basic fence laws of the Oregon land use, which say that fences should take into consideration open space, wildlife corridors, penetrable fence. The land use law is the older law, not the OLCC, which it seems to me has no idea how to regulate anything and certainly has no ability to enforce Oregon land use laws. That's your job and the county commission's job. Also on ag, 4 extensive conversations with policy person at the state ag department, sorry my throat is very sore, they say that they really have very limited regulation of marijuana growth. That in fact, all the State Department of Ag is regulating right now are the pesticides that go into edibles, and that's it. They don't have regulatory authority over pot. So we toss around all of these, oh, ag does this, and no, ag is not doing anything. This is a free-for-all right now, absolute free-for-all. So if the marijuana industry, the marijuana growers want to have ag status, agricultural product status, they're going to have to come under some form of regulation. And if they don't want to be an ag product, then maybe they could come under the Oregon land use laws and start complying. Because this, you know, I can't speak for the whole county, but in Williams, the history of Williams, the history of the area around Williams, clear up to, you know, the past, well, all of the farms that have worked so hard, Whistling Duck, others, to establish a really clean food, clean ag economy here. And it's just being blown up by monocrop pot that is out of control for the first time in my life. 3 years, the last 3 years, nightmare. So I think that we need to be careful from a regulatory perspective about saying that the State Department of Ag has any authority or that OLCC has any capacity for being responsible to the land use laws of Oregon. And I think really that I had a lot more to say, but I think really I'll leave it there for in the sense of brevity and just really to ask people to come into some kind of respect for the standards that have been put in place and really built an economy. We have a clean food economy here that's doing pretty well and can even move a county-wide vote, as we saw with the no GMO vote. I just want to say one other thing. I want to commend the staff, because I have spent a lot of time at the planning department in their wee little hours during their 4 little wee days of availability.
Summarize in about 30 seconds, please.
I really want to commend their work, but I also want to tell everybody in this room that the Secretary of State's audit, she audits all the counties once in a while to see if counties are thriving, really ranked Josephine County as failure to thrive in June. And the big reason for that is that if we take a statewide average of what the property mill levy is, it's $2.42. In Josephine County, it's 58 cents. So it's not that this county has done to enforce anything that's being discussed here tonight. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. The next person to speak will be Dr. John Gardner.
Thank you. My name is John Gardner, and I reside in Cape Junction. I'm on the City Council, but I'm not speaking for them tonight, of course. As a City Councillor, I've learned a lot about how city and county governments operate in Josephine County. The complaints generated system, for example. One of the things I've learned is we need to regard, as councillors, as representatives of our citizens, we need to have regard for the majority of our constituents and not be swayed by our own personal ideas, beliefs, whatever. And that's been hard for me. I have very determined beliefs, and I have had to change them and announce the change because of contrary ones from the majority of our constituents. Many people in the Illinois Valley have been working to bring this economic engine of Josephine County out from behind these tall fences into the post-Prohibition era. Let's not slip back into another Prohibition era. We've had several public meetings in Cape Junction for the cannabis industry, both pro and con. In our 2020 strategic plan, the Ivy citizens have begun to ask how the cannabis producers can participate in the legal economy as respected citizens. After all, since we want to tax them, shouldn't we also be helping them to stay in business? I'd like to recap my understanding of the proposed changes in the JOCO Rural Land Use Planning Code. We want to tax the industry that's been here for over 30 years, sometimes a lot more than 30 years. We have many thousand registered producers, and who knows how many unregistered ones. This category, RR 2.5, includes families who actually depend and have depended for a very long time on cannabis income to pay for their bills and keep their kids fed. We know grandmothers and grandfathers who make medicine to help sick people while just getting by themselves, but they're not registered medical growers necessarily. Why are we proposing to hurt the smallest producers whose impact is negligible on their neighbours? And that's the question it's a loaded question, because what I'm saying is it's the very large growers who have created these problems in the main. The small producers are out of sight, out of mind. Smell? No. Forget it. I would like to know approximately how many cannabis producers could be put out of business by the adoption of this change. Perhaps the planning director could give us an estimate at some point. In pursuing larger grows, well, we're already suffering the effects of allowing out-of-state grows whose loyalty to our culture, our environment, our water quality and quantity is in question, very much in question. I was relieved at the first implementation rule, which was a 2-year residency. for growers. When they took that away, I thought, oh no, this is going to be a disaster. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we had. Why did they reduce that, take away that 2-year residency rule? I have my thoughts, but you know, okay, you can tell us. That was a disaster at state level. Does the county have any obligation to protect the private property rights of the small landowners as well as the larger ones? I'm concerned that this proposal may actually violate property rights. Whether neighbours like the smell or fragrance of this crop is legal to grow. I oppose any effort of the county to restrict cannabis production by small producers. We should be going after the large growers that create most of the nuisances that people are complaining about. If people have objections to the behaviour of their neighbours, let's convene some neighbourhood councils or forums. Let's give neighbours a chance to air their views, to be heard, and to listen to the needs of others.
You have 30 seconds to summarize, please.
Effective communication is public safety that we can afford. And we've started this process in Cape Junction. Cannabis is actually healing medicine that helps people over all sorts of conditions. And this has been a prevalent fact worldwide. What could we do if we, the citizens of this county, decide to work together to grow our local economy to serve the citizens? So in closing, in my view, it would be prudent to work on cannabis and land use regulation after the new PCC has convened, if only to ensure that they will comply with new statewide rules expected early in 2017, which, who knows, may actually change the fencing requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next, we will hear from Lon Frank. Lon Frank, you have it? All right, Lon Frank is not here, so we will hear from Rich Gibson. Is Rich Gibson here? Rich Gibson is not here, so we will hear from Ron Glenn. Is Ron Glenn here? Ron Glenn is not here. So we will hear from Al Crisp.
May I speak?
That's you?
May I speak?
Not unless you fill out a testimony form.
I did.
Okay, well, we'll get to you in order then. Let's try CB for Williams.
Hi, my name is Claudia Bosway. I've been a landowner, business owner, my husband and I, for over 40 years in Williams. There's some notes I took tonight from what's been going on concerning camping issues. Changes need to be made. Concerning requests for fence changes need to be made. And I'm really concerned about educating the public. And this small venue building is fine, but I think the next meeting needs to be at the Grants Pass Performing Arts Building, and it should be on the front page of the Courier newspaper.
Please hold your phone.
So I feel that the dates coming up for the next meetings are unreasonable for the general public, especially tonight. One of my favorite holidays. Look what I'm doing, sitting down, politicking. Because I'm passionate about democracy and the freedom to choose in our community and state. The next meeting is scheduled for December with the Josephine County Commissioners. I heard that earlier tonight. During the holidays. Talk about timing. Hello. This timing is really not healthy for anybody, especially during the holidays. You planning commissioners are volunteers. You have a life. You don't need to be here on holidays in December or April 1st. for April Fool's Day, which you plan on sending a courtesy letter to growers on where we're at politically with this situation. I ask you please to hold off on the holidays, on April 1st. Let's take our time and do this right. Educate the public, bring in more people, do this in a democratic way, which you have been. And as volunteers, you can enjoy the holidays in April 1st, realizing that this is not a joke day, but a very serious democratic action that we're willing to participate and volunteer with. I request that you do not take action make recommendations with the county commissioners. Let's educate people and wait till after the elections. Oh my God, we've been under such stress with the elections that are just happening all around us. I don't think we should give ourselves more stress with all of this until next year in May 2017 with our new county commissioners. So once again, I want to thank you for your volunteer time. And please take my suggestions seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Sandy Casanelli.
Sandy Casanelli, Merlin, Oregon. The county has previously tried to get a code enforcement officer established here for quite a long time. Previous legal counsels have proposed it to all the various boards of commissioners for over a decade, all without success. It didn't get any traction until this current obstinate and disingenuous Board of Commissioners tried to ram it down our throats a few years ago. Despite overwhelming opposition, they shamefully pushed a county court enforcement ordinance to a special November election in 2013. It was resoundingly defeated by the electorate with 79.45% opposing it. You see, not only did past commissioners abhor it, but the public did so as well. Now this concept has reared its ugly head once again, this time sneakily buried within a text amendment to the Josephine County Rural Land Development Code regarding marijuana. In the very ORS that is cited, it says, the violations described must be created by an ordinance of the county. That includes a vote of the people. It was not meant to simply be a text amendment to the planning code. This was just a clever attempt to once again circumvent the will of the people of Josephine County, and as such, this Rural Planning Commission should unanimously vote down this text amendment before you. Other concerns I have regarding the proposed enforcement article are, it's drafted so vaguely that Article 12 gives far more authority to the code enforcement officer than that of just enforcing codes related to marijuana. It does not have specific language related only to marijuana. Since the public has opposed such overreaching authority, I think it would be prudent to take a bit of a closer look at what you're passing tonight or in the future, near future. It gives the enforcement officer the citing ability equal to the Oregon State Police, the sheriff, or the deputy sheriffs, for example. And Article 12.015C2 allows the state court administrator to establish the fines. It also has its inclusion of monies to cover time and gas to inspect the property on top of cost of resources to gain compliance, which is redundant and excessively punitive. And lastly, when did the county get such regulatory authority over private property? The county's authority is only over county property. Last time I looked, the county was not on my title to my land. It'd be kind of nice if you showed us where your authority to do this is over the private property in this county. In closing, I encourage property owners to put up no trespassing signs on your property. It will keep out the petty bureaucrats who want to overstep their authority with rubbish like this. Any comments or questions for me? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be, I'm going to mispronounce this because I'm having trouble reading it. I believe that it is Dan Lou. Please spell your name.
Loughran.
Can you spell that again, please?
Loughran. Irish, pronounced Lochran.
Thank you, Mr. Lochran.
I would like to thank you all for being here this evening, and all of y'all. It shows a lot of compassion. There's a lot of issues that are coming up. There's a lot of concern. My concern started with the 4 meetings, 3 of which I attended, where the county commissioner stated very clearly, we are not looking into rural residential at this time. We're looking at commercial and industrial properties at this time. At the completion of those 4 meetings, Julie, you were directed to implement this proposal. I find it highly offensive that 2 of the commissioners are on their way out, possibly. The 3rd will be out in 2 years. This issue is not pressing to be taken care of this evening. It is not necessary to be rammed through on a Halloween evening or by April 1st. This is a long term, and I believe Ms. Castanelli said it very clearly. The enforcement and overreaching is beyond belief. I support Mr. Gentry, Mr. Hunker, and Mr. Spillman in your statements. This commission has a lot to do. Education is at the forefront. I'm sorry these women were not here to hear marijuana, cannabis, does not have a beta-2 stimulant for COPD, emphysema, or asthma. It is not a stimulant. Albuterol is the treatment for the stimulant. You have a correlation, does not make causation. And they're stating that because of the smell, it causes them to have problems. I'm sorry. I have a rural residential property in Williams, 5 acres. There's a pig farm right up the street, which routinely openly broadcasts 800 gallons of effluent on the property that surrounds us. You want smell? Police. Now, the camel's nose is slightly getting under the tent, and we're about to kick it as a community. This proposal needs to be tabled and brought before the voters. This is a radical change in the rural code. Not a little. We're going back and we're starting to hear rumors and innuendos about the $20 per plant. That's not a rumor. That's openly stated in a public meeting. Let's put that into numbers. 80 licenses. Remember, these are rec licenses, which if they follow the Cole Memorandum, have 999 plants. At $20 a plant, that's $1.6 million of income. Now you take the 2,000 patients times 6 times 20, that's $2.4 million. Excuse me, you want an enforcement officer funded by this at $50,000? Put 30% on top of that, we'll give them $80,000. Holy smokes, we're over $3 million in coming in, and we're talking about $80,000 in compensation for an enforcement officer, which you have been voted down over and over and over again. Again, I sit there and say, substantial overstep of government, not a little. Now let's get back to the other crops of interest. How about grapes, veggies? What's next? My lavender farm? It has an offensive odor to some. Am I going to be charged a per plant because I have it in the ground? Ladies and gentlemen, please table this. We have 0 .0014 from your substantial math. This is not a big issue. I understand it. The fences, absolutely. The aroma, I get it. But we're in rural residential property. We have pigs, sheep, llamas, alpacas, dogs, goats, and a commercial pig farm on a rural residential piece of property. This is a substantial step in the wrong direction. I appreciate your work, Julie. I really do. It's a lot to do. But it's in the wrong direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Sure, Goodwin, can I just clarify something?
Yeah.
So maybe it might speed things up a little bit.
We keep hearing that a lot of this is about hiring a code enforcement administrator and how we've all voted that down and everything. I think perhaps if that's the stuff people want to talk about, I'm just going to try and save you some time. We have a code enforcement administrator. We have had a code enforcement administrator for many, many years. This is not about hiring a new code enforcement administrator. As a matter of fact, the position was vacant. We hired one. She started the first week in August. She's been doing great. So again, if those are the comments, maybe we can save some time by not addressing that, because there is a code enforcement administrator. This is not about hiring a code enforcement administrator.
Why do we need the new code enforcement section in the article?
Okay, so what it is proposing is, so in the codified version of the county code, there's a section on violations. And what this does is it provides a softer approach. So if the codified version goes through, it's much stricter than what you see before you. This is a softer version of that violation section is what is proposed to you.
I like that, what is in the current codified version, but I don't think this is the right time and place to address that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the commission recommends to not pass that part of it or forward that part of it, you can certainly do that. But what's going to happen then is, I'm guessing, perhaps then the codified version is what would pass and be in place. And again, that still has to go before the commissioners. I just think, you have the option to just take that element out of it. But as far as the conversations about whether we all voted down a code administrator. We never did vote down a code enforcement administrator. There's been one on the books and on staff for many, many years, and she's still there.
Thank you. All right, the next person to speak will be Nina Horsley.
Nina Horsley, Cape Junction, Oregon. To a certain extent, I appreciate what you're doing. Has anybody even bothered to read the law when it came to Measure 91? Did anybody recognize the fact that there was actually 20 different smoking apparatuses that were made illegal, and that basically you gave the state legislature the right to change and manipulate the law whenever and however they chose? I mean, this is an agricultural crop. I believe that it should be treated like an agricultural crop, that there should be no special regulations against it. There's no fences around tobacco, nor poppies, nor lavender. It doesn't make any sense. Some of these rules are just absolutely insane. Do you recognize that Monsanto was getting into the marijuana business before the law was even passed, and that's the reason for the little paragraph that gave the state legislature the right to change it whenever and however they chose to change it? I just don't want my water tasting oily and chemically or like fish emulsion. I myself grow, but I would never suck out more water than I had a right to use. And RR5 is supposed to be our residential land. And yes, we all have a right to grow our own crops. I have an organic farmer down the road from me, but they've actually been forced to tap in another well because of the major agricultural commercial growth that's on Rockydale Road. And in fact, LUBA did just rule on RR5 not being used for agricultural crops. 2016-039 and 055, respectively. They say that RR5 is for residential use. You have the right to your own personal, private farming expedition. Yes, you have the right to grow goats, weed, or food. But you don't have the right to poison your neighbor's water supply, nor do you have the right to suck your neighbor's water supply down to non-existence. I know that you guys don't have any enforcement on water rights, and the water master isn't doing her job either. And maybe you guys should push them to actually enforce these laws. I mean, if Measure 37 and Measure 49 weren't hell-bent on turning our farmland and our forest land into subdivisions, maybe we'd have plenty of farmland available for this agricultural crop that can provide 50,000 different products from one plant. And that's what I don't understand, why it is that we're not treating it like the crop that it is. And instead we're treating it as if it's something absolutely magnificently special. It's been here for decades. For as long as I've lived, 50 years, this crop has been being grown here. But this insanity that was created by this Measure 91 seems to have blown reasonableness out of question. There is no common sense being utilized here. I think we need to use common sense. I think we need to recognize that we all have a right to a peace of mind on our own property. We all have a right to grow what it is that we have a right to grow without poisoning other people. That's why there is regulations. That's why there is a code enforcement officer. But the problem with the code enforcement officer seems to overlook building code violations from large contractors while targeting 70-year-old people that are basically forced to pay fines from the previous owner. And that's a large part of the problem with the planning department, is that enforcement is not being applied. And it's really frustrating when it isn't being applied. And there is a reason for regulations. Who wants to walk into a house that was built with toothpicks, shut the door and have it fall down around you? Who wants to live in a house that has lead pipes for your drinking water? Nobody does. I also don't like the fact that there's permits that are allowed to give the timber industry the right to poison me with glyphosate, 2,4-D, or imazapyr.
You have 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you, sir. I want this to be more fair for everybody. Large ag shouldn't have the right to contaminate my well water or poison it. I don't mind if you grow your own crops. I don't mind that at all. But please, think about not allowing RR5 to be used for agricultural purposes, especially large ag crops that contaminate. Please think about the quality of our life and our health to boot.
All right, thank you very much. Next we will hear from Wendy Reardon. Wendy Reardon. Right. Then we will hear from Jeff Gitto.
Gitto.
Thank you.
Thank you, Board Director. I stand before you more on kind of a philosophical standpoint, because it could be, a lot of this could be argued, and you have a very, very difficult job. I am not born here. I came here. I came here over any other place. And I've looked at other counties, looked at other states. I came to Josephine County for, to say the soul of Josephine County. And as I saw some of these things come across, the thing that stood out to me, as opposed to 4.1, 12.6, comprehensive plan, goal number 1 for agricultural, it was just the regulatory aspect, or even the expeditious promulgation of the regulatory aspect. It's what jumped out to me. jumped out to me, signed the form, and spoke.
Could you speak up a little bit?
Yes, jumped out to me, signed the form, and spoke. I don't know how to put it necessarily in words. It could be whittled down constitutionally as equal protection for different types of farmers, or it could be brought into a fulcrum of property rights and people who would move here with a certain expectation of the property that they purchase, and that expectation would be taken away. And that could be, as I said, analyzed on many different levels. I just wanted to kind of speak on a human level of what it is that I feel I moved to as Josephine County. And sans all the others. And even it was comedic on some levels, not to name our neighbor counties. You know, when I hear the commentary about things that would happen, you're like, that's why I'm in Josephine. Literally, verbatim. That's how I would approach it. So I just feel I wanted to come to you as a board and as a director with that analysis, because it can get passionate in all other ways. So that's the summary. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin McCabe.
I'm Kevin McCabe. I am one of those 66 applications that's on rural residential. I wanted to say that it's been a struggle, but I think I'll be getting through it. I'm afraid if you put a lot of restrictions on rural residential, a lot of people will be going back into their garages and you won't know they're there, but they will be growing. And that's the stuff that will be going across state lines, and it won't be tested for pesticides. And I think if you put too many restrictions on rural residential, that is where it's going to head. I guess that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Yes, you can. All right. My question for you is, why did you choose to grow in a rural residential area and not in an exclusive farm area?
The cost of the land. I could not afford to buy EFU land.
The exclusive farming?
It's way, way more expensive. I really wish I could have bought 70 acres. Millions of dollars is what we're talking about for the property. The property I ended up with was substantially less.
All right. Jeff Verser. Jeff Verser. All right. Dr. Shannon Feinberg.
I'm Shavonna Feinberg, and I'm part of the Williams Community Advisory Committee. So I'm speaking on behalf. The Williams CAC is one of the the only at this point remaining CACs, and we are a very active CAC. What I'm asking you to do is to separate the very, I believe, non-controversial amendments relating to CACs in Articles 12 and 20, and then the main Article 69.5. And none of these have any relationship to the proposed regulations of growing on rural residential properties. None of these are proposing any new regulations. What they're about is notification. The CAC was asked, we recently had a town meeting and we had 80 people come, which is pretty large for a very small rural area. And we were asked at the town meeting as the CAC to propose something like Article 69.5. This was by an overwhelming vote, many of whom were cannabis growers in our community. Well, so once again, this article has no new regulations, it's no relationship to rural residential properties. What it's about is receiving notification of applications that are submitted to the planning department for industrial, commercial, or cannabis-related applications, and that wouldn't include grows, because grows don't have to apply. It has to do with processing plants and the location of processing plants. We're asking for just enough notification so that we have time to call a town meeting if it looks like it's going to be a controversial location or a controversial issue. And so that we have a very successful history in mediating the differences within our community between the growers, the pro-cannabis factions, and the factions that aren't in favor of cannabis, to give us a chance to have a town meeting, see what we can do to negotiate these opinions, and use that to inform the CAC input to the planning department. The final clause of Article 69.5 only says that if the community and the CAC feel that the proposed use would have significant negative impact on the community or might adversely affect environmental concerns such as wildfire, we can at least ask the community development director to require a site plan review, which we would do very cautiously because we really don't want to incur additional costs for members of our community. But we could ask the director to require a site plan review, which then allows the neighbors to be notified and allows these kinds of things to be considered. So again, I'm asking you to separate the things about the CAC from these obviously controversial proposals regarding rural residential. We're not offering any new regulations. We are just asking for early or timely notification, which currently we don't have to get notified because most of these go into the ministerial track instead of the quasi-judicial track, so we don't need to be notified. We're saying that we would like to be notified because we do represent the community. And if, for whatever time I have left, we had a recent, very controversial situation in Williams where a beloved community member who has been a licensed grower, whose son had epileptic fits and was amazingly helped by the cannabis oil that has no psychoactive, the CBD oil that has no psychoactive activities. And this father saw his son so helped that he became very passionate about producing really high quality, no pesticides, organic medicines, purely medicines. But he chose to do it, or applied to do it, on a property that's central to Williams. And again, this was a ministerial decision, so there was absolutely no need for the planning department to notify us. But because we've worked closely with them in the past, at some point they gave us the courtesy of notifying us. This issue of where he originally wanted to locate the processing plant almost split our community in half. I mean, it was really between close friends and neighbors. There was a lot of controversy. When we finally got in there, we were able to hold the town meeting. The person who had the application was so impacted by his friends and his neighbors that he actually chose to locate his processing plant in a different location on the edge of town, which everybody supports. And the situation that was breaking our community apart was averted. And it even getting as far as it did could have been averted had we known about this application from the beginning. So again, I'm asking you to separate the articles, the little piece in Article 12 and 20, and then Article 69.5 that relates to early notification of the Williams CAC. Did you have a question?
Are you suggesting that those sections, those articles of this proposed text amendment could be floated independent of the rest of the proposed change?
I don't know if that's possible, but it seems like we're talking about some different areas, and one has great controversy and the other one I don't believe does.
Right, I think what Siobhan is saying is, so if the Plan Commission decides we're not going to recommend anything, she's saying, well, yeah, at least send forward our piece. Or if you're going to send through bits and pieces, would you please make sure her piece is included to move forward as well?
And it's in Articles 12, 20, just little things in those, and mainly Article 69.5.
Thank you.
All right, next we will hear from Jerry Seibert. Is Jerry Seibert present? In that case, we will hear from Tracy Lawson, Tracy Longton, Tony, I'm sorry, I think this is a Tony. I'm sorry, I'm really good at saying Tony, something that begins with an L. Okay, if we have no Tony or Tracy here, then we will go on. Vanessa Braley? And please state your name, so I pronounce it wrong.
No, you pronounced it correct, Vanessa Braley. There's a lot of really good opinions here tonight, and everybody's very emotional, and I understand that. But I think this is more of a procedural issue at this point. Procedurally, that enacting or recommending these amendments to the VCC would be moving backwards because considering the provisions right now could potentially be overridden or conflict with state law. And as we know, the legislative session in February 2017 is going to be addressing some of these issues. So we need to wait for that to mature before we start enacting local legislation and see how that goes and let the industry sort of unfold. We don't have a really great understanding of how REC is working with medicinal at this point. So I think it's premature, and I think that that it should be tabled.
Thank you. All right. Bill Erdl. Not see Bill here. Bernard Falkowski.
Right here.
Okay, I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I was the oldest soldier deployed in the Middle East in 02 and 03, and retired from the Oregon National Guard. Now, no two people can agree 100% on anything, and they shouldn't. But in order to solve a problem, we must first define it. Now, the definition, okay, how serious is the odor? What impact does it have on the health and well-being of those that are exposed to it? And what can be done about it? Once you can answer these questions, now you can head to a solution. And I don't think it has been analyzed in that manner, and that's why we don't have a solution right now. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your service to our country.
Yes.
Sir? Question?
Bernie, you have a question?
Were you stating that this area is so complex that you feel that we're not able to resolve it?
No, you have to define the problem.
Define the problem.
Exactly what is the problem, and now we can deal with it.
Thank you. All right, Bob Hart.
Madam Chair, are we going to make it through all of them?
We're not going to make a problem. In fact, this will be, I believe, the last one.
Well, if we can go, how many do we have left?
We have 9 left, but after these 9, that 9 will take at least 45 minutes. After that, we still have to have deliberations and findings, and there's no way we can finish tonight.
I'm prepared to say.
But we could, if you like, we could try, stay until 10 and try and at least get through all the testimony and then continue it for the deliberations and findings. But after Mr. Hart has made his testimony, then we can take a vote on whether to continue. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Planning Commission. For the record, Bob Hart, 5126 West 7th Street. Been a land use planner, 17 years in the planning department. and over 20 years as a private planning consultant. I've looked at the proposals, and I'll try and get into some of the details here, and then give an overall picture of what I see. The first thing that I think is a primary consideration is the proposal that everything be retroactive to October 1st. In ORS 197, it says you cannot change the goalpost in the middle of an application. You are bound to complete the processing in an application that was in place at the day the application was submitted. So if this won't go into effect till next April, that would be the day that we would have to change when things would become effective. So right now, this whole thing of the proposal to say, well, only those applications that were in place since October 1st, it's contrary to state law. The other thing is OLCC was not always quickly able to process their applications. They had quite a backlog. So punishing people that were in process, I think, is not proper. Looking at the simple question in the rural residential of noise, that only a fan is allowed. I've seen neighbors complain about just about everything under the sun. If somebody had a small tractor and was trying to move a load of soil from one part of the property to another, that would be a noise that wasn't the fan. And it's not going to be any more impactful than the gentleman next door with the little lawn tractor that's putting around. He would have the same noise impact as some small things that are a part of a processed growing operation. One of the questions that seems to be a big one is fences. The way it's proposed is you're creating a no man's land by the interpretation of the department at this point in time that fences, because they're over 7 feet and require a building permit, cease to become fences and they are now structures and they must meet setbacks. So if the setback is 30 feet and you set a fence 30 feet from your property line, that's going to be a no man's land that's going to lead to property disputes over time. Because as other owners move in, they're going to look at the fence and say, well, that must be the property line. There's all kinds of property line adjustments that have gone to the planning office because people take a fence line to become a property line. I think that's a terrible situation the way it is. And I know it's not in the code. It's an interpretation that was done shortly after I left the department. There was an assistant planning director that put that into place because it was the only way that they knew how to get an application to the building department to make sure that they reviewed it, that it had a building permit, was to say anything over 7 feet was a structure required a development permit and then a building permit. I had the same kind of the discussion with the department over structures in a flood hazard area. In farm zone property, you can ask for an exemption for a building that is purely for farm use, and it's waived from the building requirements. But if it's in a flood hazard area, then you do have to have permits because of the impacts of flooding. But I was told, well, it ceases to become an agricultural structure at that point. I said, no, a greenhouse is still a greenhouse, but their interpretation was that it is no longer a greenhouse. So you get into these weeds of things, and that's why, in a bigger picture, I think this is a problem because the level of detail that's being proposed is micromanagement to the point that everybody is going to become a criminal. Nobody's...
30 seconds.
Yes, Mr. Church. Nobody's going to be able to meet the standards the way they're being proposed, that everybody is going to slip up a little bit. I think this needs to look at things from a much larger perspective to see how to make things work and not just how to administer things. And one last piece, that fee was discussed at the Board of County Commissioners. It was more than a placeholder because it was in recommendation for a number of fees to include property line adjustments, final plats, address fees. And so this was something that was proposed for $20 a plant, 25% going to the planning department, 25% to probation, and 50% to the sheriff's office. These are the kinds of things that are being all crammed in on this marijuana issue. And I think it's not near as complex as everybody's making it up to. And I think you ought to relook at things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. At this point, let's discuss how we want to proceed. We have 9 more testimony cards tonight. We have 10 who were not here tonight, who, if they do come to the continued hearing, will be able to speak later. Anyone else who comes to the continued hearing who was not here tonight will also be able to speak later. So we don't know how many people that we will have talking at the next hearing.
We're not obligated to continue a hearing because somebody left.
That's right. No, but we will be continuing the hearing anyway. Now we could, so some of our options are, we could finish our testimony tonight, we could close testimony and continue the hearing. I believe we could continue the hearing just for findings, is that correct?
Correct.
So we could hear the remaining testimony tonight, close it, continue just for findings. We could continue it at this point or at some time that we decide, leave the rest of the testimony to the next continuation, in which case we would hear whoever else wanted to testify. There's no chance that we're going to be able to do the findings tonight. So
can we see if any of the 9 people are here?
I don't think it's appropriate to ask the people, if they're on that list, to say, oh, go away and come back again in 2 weeks to talk. If they showed up tonight, prepared to speak, we should listen to them speak.
all right, let me see how many people are here. Daryl Anglin, is Daryl Anglin here? Daryl Anglin is not here. Judy Ahrens. Is Judy Ahrens here? Judy Ahrens is not here. Claudia Beausoleil already spoke, so she filled out two forms. All right. Shane Kristen is here. Paco de Spazio Buttonsmith is here. Nick Kirby is here. Anna Fornaton is here. Carolyn Gina.
She left.
All right, she's not here. And William Gina.
He left.
All right, so in that case, we only have 4 people left to hear. So I think if we're all agreed, we should continue here. And then we will continue, close the hearing, the public part of the hearing, and continue with the findings.
And by public part of the hearing, you mean public testimony?
Public testimony.
When we talk about it, people can,
Yes,
it is public stuff.
Yes, if we close the public hearing tonight, that means that we have closed the testimony, and when we reconvene in a continued hearing, that will be in order for deliberation and findings and to that.
Are you looking for a motion? Are you looking for a motion?
No, we can continue at this point. Everybody's agreed, so we can just continue. Shane Kristen.
You guys look like you need a little humor. Well, I'm here. I'd like to clear up some confusion, because I'm sure some of you are feeling. Let's talk about grandfathered. You cannot just throw that around. A grandfathered medical operation is someone who was established growing 96 plants or less down to 48. Grandfather is a term that is applied to medical only. Please, let's not confuse it. If You want to talk about somebody that has plants below 48 and below, which I am a medical grower on my property. There's 48 holes. I have been growing on that property for 10 years. So maybe if you come up with some verbiage like an accepted, established medical grow, it might alleviate some confusion. There is no grandfather clause for recreational grows. It's just not there. So language is important. And I appreciate you, because I know you've been working. Fences. Let's talk about fences. We're working in Williams. I must confess that I'm on the board of directors of Oregon Sun-Grown Growers Guild. One of our members, our past president, has gotten an exemption to the fencing law. It is a wire fence. You can see his plans. The exemption he got is it's 150 feet back from the roadway. He's on EFU land, which means he can plant to the property line and no one can do anything about it. Let's talk about smell. There are days I stink. I told you, I'm bringing you humor. But the honest, I've asked over and over and over. I believe it's the responsibility of regulators to delineate where that smell is coming from. Is it all year? Is it just 6 weeks of the year? How many people can live through 6 weeks? If it's all year, it's because people that grow marijuana, pardon me, cannabis, smoke it. And you're going to smell it all year. Let's give you some positive feedback. The setbacks that you have proposed, if you keep them at 10 and 25 feet, my God, that's reasonable. How'd you like that? Compost. Oh boy, you're going to limit me to a 10 by 10 compost pile when I need 3 of them, probably at least 10 feet wide, and at least 10 feet long and 4 feet wide. Now, it has no cannabis material in it. It's my house waste, the vegetable waste, my coffee grounds. Oh my God, those are important worms. I'm on forestry ag land, so whatever you folks do is probably not going to touch me. So I don't really have a dog in this show, other than patient rights. Myself, I have glaucoma, I have rheumatoid arthritis, and chronic pain from a job injury that caused me to retire as a regulator of the state of California. I enforced environmental regulations in the oil field. So, you know, we spent a lot of time trying to educate people, especially people that were writing laws that were going to affect our life. We brought down state legislatures, state reps, into our farms to show them that we were not animals, that we were not the monsters. I would make an offer to any of you that have not been on a grow to come and see one. Probably a wrong time of year to see them pretty green things. You know, we've been outrunning mold. I should really, you know, give up some time here. But I have one pertinent question I think is very important. Do you believe in God? Do you? You have a sign on the wall that says, "In God we trust." There's that book that's been shoved down my throat most of my life. There's a lot of good words in there. But the one that was brought up by that young man earlier. God gave us plants and seeds to thee. Well, I'm a thee. Don't mess with my thee. My name is Shane Christen. I'm on the board of Oregon Growers Guild. And if you Google my name, you'll find out I've been out of the closet for 2 years standing up for patient rights. And I'm not going to go away. I'm going to come back here and make you laugh some more. But we're going to win. We are going to win. We have won. We have the vote. Here's a funny thing.
You have about 30 seconds.
Okay, I'm going to probably take 45. But here's something you should really recommend to the county commissioners. If they're going to move on this any at all, they're going to put their rump in the sling with the Department of Revenue if they try and collect any money associated with cannabis. Now, you can collect money for your fees, for your inspections, but you can't collect any money for cannabis. I mean, it went to vote. I voted for that 3% for the county. You should probably recommend that they open more dispensaries so they can glean some more money. How's that for closing?
I'd like to ask him a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead, in all seriousness. As a representative of the growers,
Yes.
the issue with fences, is it so much to keep your product in, or is it to keep the untoward out?
It was to satisfy a law.
But let's think about it realistically. I don't want fences, and if a really nice hedge would be appropriate, and instead we're seeing refrigerators and cars piled up.
To honestly answer your question, a hedgerow would be beautiful. A see-through fence would be just as beautiful.
So since you saw it passed and you were part of the group that negotiated the legislation, you accepted the fence because of what? Is it, like I said, to keep people in or to keep people out?
To get me in the ground. That's why I accepted it, so that I could plant and grow medicine for patients.
What we're seeing is tourism. We've talked about tourism in here, but what we're really seeing is people wandering our neighborhoods looking for things to steal and looking for marijuana grows to also steal. The single plant, the double plant, the local growers. So the question becomes, and security is an issue, what are the growers doing to minimize the impact on the neighborhoods?
I know a few people have dog runs, 3-foot double fence that runs around their grow area where they put scary dogs in. Myself, I have a dog that barks at the wind. Everybody in the neighborhood knows he lives there. People know that I'm somewhat nuts, and that I can be a little intense. I'm a very passionate man. A lot of people don't know what I would do. That's my defense. I believe that we need a security fence. I believe that it should not be impenetrable. It should not be able to be walked through as a possible hedge would be. I believe we need a see-through fence that would not need a permit to put up. I mean, it's not a structure.
I have a question, though. I got to follow up on that. What would be a see-through fence that you couldn't walk through? Give me an example.
Okay.
Chicken wire.
Chicken wire. Deer fence. We could go hog wire. We could go the 2x.
Or the same kind of fence that A dairy farm I put up to keep the cows in?
Yeah.
Okay.
But in all fairness, I
That's what
had
I want to hear.
somebody cut my fence to get to the neighbors behind us. So, I mean, we say, from a security standpoint, is there an agreement that
my
has
dear,
to be reached?
I was a registered locksmith in California. Okay, they gave me a license to break and enter. One of our tenets is locks only keep out honest people. No matter what we do, there may be an interloper at some time.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. All right, let's move on.
Oh, one more thing?
Your time was up quite a while ago.
Yes, ma'am, I understand that. But I'm going to turn into a protester or a protector. I stand with Standing Rock. Water is life.
There you go.
Paco Despacio Buttonsmith.
Good evening, and thank you for hearing me. And thank you for having us on Halloween, because I had no idea what I was going to wear for a Halloween costume. And then when I heard about this hearing, I thought I could go as a pot grow that has one of these black plastic fences around it.
The people who left early have no idea the show they're missing.
Thank you. I'm not really a professional entertainer. So I can't understand why people can't see pot. I mean, every other crop, people have stolen watermelons, they've stolen just about any crop that farmers grow, and yet we have to have these fences to hide a beautiful plant. It speaks to me of a certain prejudice against marijuana. But I want to get to what's really important to me, and what I'm concerned about now is that I've been self-employed since I came here 40 years ago. I was a tree planter then, doing reforestation, did a blacksmithing apprenticeship, and then became a silversmith specializing in buttons, and I've supported myself doing that for many years, till the Wall Street crashes kind of destroyed my business. And between that and a car crash that broke my neck, I almost got my house repossessed for not being able to pay my taxes. And fortunately, with the legalization, I was able to help my neighbors sell some of their, because I didn't grow that whole time. I just didn't like the planes flying over when it was illegal, and I wanted a different kind of cottage industry, but I believe in cottage industry. And I think that small-scale cottage industries are really good for the people of Josephine County. A lot of people are able to make it because they can grow a little pot and sell some of the medical dispensaries. But I'm concerned that the legislation tends to favor these great big grows of people who are under corporate control, who don't really care about our area. And so if we're going to regulate this, we should take care of the people who live here, and the small growers, the R5 and smaller growers. They'll take much better care of the land than the people who come here with profit motives and huge debts to pay, for all their financing. The other thing is, I think they're about the prejudice against marijuana. The federal government had a disinformation, psychological warfare campaign waged called the War on Drugs. And in psychological warfare, there's two fronts. You try to convince the enemy that it's not worth pursuing, and you try to convince the home people that it is pursuing this, that it is worth pursuing this war and putting lots of people in jail, endangering, all the costs of making marijuana illegal. And to make the lies more plausible, they have disallowed research. And so a lot of regulation is based on disinformation, prejudice, perhaps some political motivation. And it's not really looking at the effects on all of the people.
You have about 30 seconds to summarize.
Okay. So, I would just like you to consider the facts and people of this area when you're composing your regulations.
Thank you. Nick Kirby.
Hello, everybody. I don't know whether you guys can hear me without the microphone or not.
No.
No.
Sir,
It's my phone, and you have to face
have to
you guys.
address the commissioner, just use the microphone.
Okay, it just felt a little impersonal, just watching everybody, watching their backs, throughout the whole evening. So.
For the viewers on TV, you have to face the microphone so they can hear what you say.
All right. Just a couple things that I wanted to cover. Actually, it was not on the handout tonight, and I had actually talked to Julie earlier this week about it, about the proposed canopy regulations as far as the square footage. She did actually answer that is, as far as the per license, the 40,000 square foot canopy limitation per licensee, not per piece of land. But I just wanted to see that maybe that was put in writing a little bit clearer, if that was something that was possibly going to be actually passed, just that it wasn't vague. It didn't state that necessarily 40,000 square foot of mature canopy, and it also did not state, like she had said, that they're more looking out for a husband and a wife trying to get 2 licenses for the same piece of property that, they're probably filing jointly, so their income's going to the same household. So I could understand that limitation, but whenever it comes to people that are purchasing expensive pieces of property that is, hopefully a little bit more suitable, that, larger acreage that's zoned properly, trying to not encroach on neighbors and things like that. I just want to make sure before anything gets passed, especially after purchasing a rather large and expensive piece of property that is zoned properly, rather than going the more inexpensive route that might have more complaints down the road and more problems to adhere to. I just want to make sure that everything is in writing, that 40,000 square foot is per leasee or per producer, and it's not per the land. I guess that was my main concern. And also, I wanted to find out on the fencing. I know you guys said you don't want necessarily the shade cloth. And I can understand that because the shade cloth and the plastic may rip and blow across neighbors' yards. But whenever it comes to professional visual barriers, like the green mesh netting that professional companies that put it out for like Lowe's or, government water treatment plants and things like that, that have these green fabric visual barriers. if it's a professionally bought fence product from a fence company, is that legal? Because I didn't know, I mean, a chain link fence, 8 feet tall, up to your guys' standards, but with that professional mesh that won't necessarily rip and, go across the neighbors' yards, would that be something that would be allowed?
Thank you, Ms. Schultz, would you like to address that?
Sure.
Okay, let me back up a little bit on the 40,000 square foot canopy issue, just so everybody understands what he is talking about. So the state limits the canopy to 40,000 square feet per licensee. This is OLCC. They limit it to 40,000 square foot unless the county passes a regulation saying that they can exceed it. So you could maybe, we have the option to say, well, perhaps farms could be 60,000 square foot canopy. It's not in the rules before you because we chose not to do anything with it. When we had talked with people initially about it, they said, let's see how things go first before we go and open it up to larger grows. So there's no proposal at all right now to allow people to exceed the 40,000 square feet. What I had explained to Mr. Kirby?
Yes, sir.
What I explained to him is what we have seen in the office is OLCC has the rule that it's 40,000 square feet per licensee. So what we see is OLCC allowing several licensees on the same piece of property. And that's how they're able to exceed that 40,000 square foot canopy limit. So it's not a county rule, it's an OLCC rule, and that's how OLCC is interpreting it. That as long as the licensees, and I believe it says they have something about no common...
They can't have co-ownership.
Co-ownership or
Yes,
something, and then they can have, however it's worded. But they do allow several licensees on the same property, and that's how they're able to get around that 40,000 square foot canopy limit.
And
about the fencing, he also asked about whether it could be the green, what do you call that?
Green wind fence.
And I can't answer that right now because I don't know the state building code. It's one where we'd have to ask the building official whether or not it meets code.
okay, I mean, if it's allowed for a lot of water treatment facilities, and actually I've seen certain lumber yards or possibly like a Lowe's or Home Depot around the back side of their building, they use that. So I don't know whether that's, up in county.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to misspeak. I'd have to see if that meets the state building code or not. I have seen some of them. I actually went past one of them yesterday where the bottom of it actually, it must be from weed eating or something. The bottom starts fraying off, and then the bottom part of the fence starts disappearing. The meshing starts disappearing. But I just can't answer that. I'd have to check with the building official. It's not something we've been asked before.
Okay, and just to touch back on the 40,000, whenever you were talking about having multiple licensees per piece of property, I think, I don't want to point in any set direction, but I might have got a head shaker, or two. And I want to also kind of go into someone that's trying to do this properly and not trying to purchase a piece of property that's unsuitable, that's going to be causing these complaints that are right around other people's houses or on too small of land because they're trying to do it by themselves on a budget. They'll, unfortunately, a lot of times have to pick property that's unsuitable. Like in my situation, I'm trying to buy or have purchased a piece of property that is suitable and rather a lot larger, with the hopes of being able to lease out a couple plots to other small-time growers that are trying to get started. They can't afford a $400,000 piece of DFU zone property. And maybe somebody that doesn't want to grow on a rural residential piece of property. And again, I am not against it by any means. I think, I don't want to get off subject there. I mean, for anybody that is growing on rural residential, I don't want you to think that I'm against you by any means. I And I think before completely eliminating it on rural residential, we need to, yes, we need to look at setbacks, which we're obviously having to do even on my property. But having it inside of a filtered greenhouse.
Your time
Running out.
is out. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's just touch back on the 40,000 square feet.
That's
No
an
problem.
OLCC issue, it's not in here.
So you guys follow whatever the OLCC allows?
We can't overrule the OLCC. We don't have that authority.
Then that was my main reason here tonight. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Mr. Kirby, if you have other questions, certainly call the second officer.
Anna Fornachon.
Thank you for hearing me tonight. I'm very aware that I'm the last person here. My name is Anna Fornachon, and I'm a member of the CAC in Williams. And I just want to reiterate a number of points that my fellow member Shavana Feinberg mentioned earlier. And one of them is to do with the proposed amendment change for us being able to receive information when the applications for industrial or commercial or cannabis-related applications come to us. Well, that we would like to have them come to us. Mainly because of what we've seen happen over the last couple of months since a couple of applications went through for the processing facilities. We didn't have very much time at all to look at the information, and so it was very difficult to get input from the locals and be able to provide a forum for that to happen. And because of that, as well as other people finding out in different ways, there was a lot of animosity and fracturing of the community. And as members of CAC, we feel that we're part of our duty is to be able to represent the whole community of Williams and to be able to bring information to them that is pertinent to their lives and to how Williams functions as a whole. And so I would also ask that you consider to allow the sections of the proposed amendment that are to do with us asking to be able to receive that information to be able to go forward, even if there are other aspects of the proposed amendment that cannot go through because of for whatever reason, for there not being able to be a decision about it at this point, or being unaccepted. There are a large number of people that came to that meeting, the second town meeting that we had, that are growers in Williams, and a lot of them are full-time growers. They have been there for a long time. They've gone through the whole process from when it first started as medical marijuana, and there's a lot of concern about where all of this is going, and I've heard a few people tonight express their concerns about the rules and the regulations that have come forward with the recreational, the Measure 91 going through, that things are changing so fast, and I think that a lot of the concern that we have in Williams is surrounding that too, and that if we as a CAC can have some kind of way of receiving information ahead of time before applicants are granted their licenses, that this will give us somehow where we can, as a united town, be able to come up with decisions for the place where we live. And I ask that you consider this in your decision.
Thank you. All right. The public portion of this hearing is now closed. We will be continuing hearing to a time and date certain, but at that point, there will be no more public comment or testimony, That will be only for deliberation and findings on the part of the commissioners. To continue, let's ask the planning staff what would be an appropriate date.
Okay, so Melissa is she's very together, and she already checked and found that this is available next Monday, Monday the 7th, for a continuance hearing at 6 p.m.
And does that satisfy the public notice requirement?
Well, because the public hearing is closed, we don't have to do a notice in the newspaper anymore. All we have to do is make sure our agendas meet, that our agenda meets the notice requirement, which is 24 hours before the meeting. So as long as we have an agenda out by Friday, we'll satisfy the meeting requirements.
All right. Let's take a vote of the commissioners. Do I hear a motion to continue this hearing to a time and date certain next Monday at 6 o'clock?
I will make a motion for us to reconvene on Monday, November 7th to complete this hearing at that time.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
All right, then.
Did
Motion
you
was
say
made.
7 or 6? 6, okay.
It's Monday the 7th.
Monday,
the
November
7th.
7th at 6 o'clock. Right, the motion was made by Commissioner Gardner and seconded by Commissioner Richardson. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Church,
Aye, in favor.
Commissioner Richardson,
Aye.
Commissioner Goodwin,
Yes.
Commissioner Chambers,
Aye.
Commissioner Gardner.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes 5-0. So we will be continuing this 6 o'clock next Monday with no further public comment and testimony. All right, the public hearing is now closed, and please, as you leave, please be quiet because we do have a couple of other agenda items that we need to vote on whether we want to deal with those tonight or wait until next week. We might be able to get out.